My mother dropped me off at a remote boarding school when I was 8 years old. She promised she would pick me up for Thanksgiving. She never came back. She never visited, not a single time in 10 years. The day I graduated high school, I stood on a wooden stage and looked out at a sea of proud parents holding bouquets and cameras. I searched the crowd for a familiar face. My chair in the audience remained empty. 13 years passed in total silence. Then, last Tuesday, my phone rang. My mother was on the other end, frantic, demanding $3,000 for rent, claiming she was about to be homeless. I did not yell. I did not argue. I just asked her one question. When she heard it, the line went dead silent for 40 seconds. Before I tell you what I asked her, please take a moment to like and subscribe to Luke Revenge Start, but do this only if this story genuinely resonates with you. Also, drop your age and where you are watching from in the comments. I read every single one. Now, let me take you to my office overlooking the Alaskan wilderness, where that 13-year silence finally broke. My name is Almira Johnson. I am 31 years old and I live in Alaska. My office sits on a high ridge surrounded by towering Sitka spruce and a clear view of the Chugach Mountains. The air outside was 10 degrees below zero that afternoon, crisp and unforgiving. Inside, my sanctuary was warm, built with cedar and floor-to-ceiling glass. I earned this view. I built my luxury eco-tourism company, Aurora Estates, from the ground up. I survived on academic scholarships, waitressing shifts, and a refusal to fail. I created a life out of the scraps I was given. I was reviewing quarterly financial projections when my personal cell phone illuminated on the mahogany desk. A Seattle area code flashed on the screen. I answered it out of habit, expecting a vendor or a client. Instead, a voice I had not heard since I was a child filled the room. Almira. Oh my God, Almira. It was Brenda, my mother. Her tone carried no warmth, no hesitation, no guilt for a decade of abandonment. It was sharp, breathless, and soaked in entitlement. "Frank left me," she sobbed into the receiver. "He took the truck. He emptied the checking account. The landlord handed me a 3-day eviction notice this morning. If I do not wire them $3 grand by tomorrow, I am out on the street. You have to help me." No greeting, no apology. 13 years without a word. And she opened her mouth only to make a demand. I leaned back in my leather chair. I felt my heart rate slow down. I held the phone to my ear and watched a bald eagle circle the tree line outside my window. As a child, the sound of her voice would have sent me into a panic. I spent my entire youth terrified of her approval, waiting by the dorm room window, hoping her car would pull into the gravel driveway. Now, she was just a stranger in Seattle with bad credit. "Are you listening to me?" Brenda snapped, her tears vanishing the moment she did not get an immediate yes. "I need you to wire the money today." I picked up my ceramic mug and took a slow sip of black coffee. "What was the name of the boarding school you left me at for 10 years? I asked. The silence that followed was heavy. It was not a brief pause. It was a staggering 40 seconds of dead air. I timed it by the digital clock on my desk. 10 seconds passed. I heard her breath hitch. 20 seconds. I heard the faint sound of city traffic in the background on her end. 30 seconds. I heard her brain scrambling, desperate to find a single detail she had never bothered to learn. She had no idea. She never read my report cards. She never signed a permission slip. She just forwarded the tuition checks that kept me safely hidden from her new life. She discarded me so she could focus entirely on her new husband and my younger half-sister, Chloe. Brenda stammered, her voice trembling as the reality of her failure set in. I pressed the red button on my screen. The call disconnected. I set the phone face down on the desk. A profound sense of peace washed over me. The ghost that had haunted my childhood was gone, replaced by a desperate woman who had run out of options. I turned my attention back to my laptop, ready to finalize the payroll for my 50 employees. The conflict felt resolved. 10 minutes later, the phone vibrated against the wood. The screen lit up with a text message from her number. I picked it up and read the words twice, the icy Alaskan wind suddenly howling against my office windows. "You leave me no choice. We are coming to Alaska." The words on the screen glowed against the dimming light of my office. "You leave me no choice. We are coming to Alaska." I stared at the text message. The plural pronoun caught my attention immediately. We. Brenda was not traveling alone. She was bringing her favored daughter, Chloe, and Chloe's husband, Trent. They were packing their bags, marching toward a destination they knew nothing about, invading a life they had no part in building. I set the phone down and turned my chair toward the floor-to-ceiling windows. The sun was dipping below the Chugach Mountains, casting long, sharp shadows across the snow-covered pines. The bitter cold outside mirrored the chill that had lived in my chest for 23 years. Seeing that threat on a screen triggered a vivid memory of the day the silence began. I was 8 years old, sitting in the passenger seat of Brenda's sedan. We drove for hours through winding, icy roads until we reached a sprawling brick building isolated in the wilderness. It was a boarding school for children who had run out of options, or, more accurately, children whose parents wanted a clean slate. Brenda told me to grab my duffel bag from the trunk. She knelt in the gravel, fixed the collar of my jacket, and promised she would be back to pick me up for Thanksgiving. She told me to be a good girl and not to cause any trouble for the headmaster. Then she got back into her car, put it in drive, and pulled away. I stood on the frozen dirt and watched her taillights disappear around the bend. I waited by the window every day that November. Thanksgiving came and went, then Christmas, then my 9th birthday. The silence stretched into a decade. I learned the distinct rhythm of the mailroom, watching other girls receive care packages, letters, and birthday cards. My cubby remained empty, year after year. I spent holidays in the empty dormitories, reading borrowed books and helping the janitorial staff sweep the halls. Brenda discarded me so she could focus her time, energy, and finances on her new husband and their new baby, Chloe. Chloe was the golden child, raised in a warm house in Seattle, handed everything she ever desired, shielded from the harsh realities of the world. I was the secret Brenda left in the snow. That isolation reached its peak on a Tuesday evening in late May, my high school graduation. The gymnasium smelled of floor wax and cheap floral arrangements. I sat in a row of folding chairs wearing a rented cap and gown, listening to the principal call out names. Every time a student walked across the wooden stage, a section of the bleachers erupted in cheers. Parents held up cameras, grandmothers wiped tears, siblings clapped. When my name echoed through the speakers, the silence in the room was deafening. I walked across the stage, took my diploma, and looked out at the audience. I searched the crowd for a familiar face, hoping against all logic that Brenda had finally remembered me. But my designated chair in the second row was empty. I did not cry that day. I took that empty chair and forged it into armor. If I was going to be entirely alone in the world, I decided I would be untouchable. I worked 3 jobs through my early 20s. I saved every dollar, waiting tables at night and guiding wilderness tours during the day. I studied the tourism market, bought my first acre of remote land at auction, and built a single cabin with my own hands. I leveraged that cabin to build another, and then another. Today, Aurora Estates is a premier ecotourism destination catering to the wealthiest clients in the world. I own 500 acres of pristine Alaskan wilderness, a private helicopter pad, and a grand lodge that generates millions in revenue. I transformed the wilderness that was supposed to be my prison into my kingdom. My phone vibrated again, pulling me back to the warmth of my office. I looked at the text message once more. The math did not add up. A sudden, sharp realization cut through the lingering memories. Brenda had called me less than an hour ago, frantic, claiming she was facing imminent eviction. She demanded $3,000 to keep a roof over her head. Yet, her text declared she was boarding a flight with Chloe and Trent. Same day, last-minute airline tickets from Seattle to Anchorage are incredibly expensive. Purchasing 3 one-way fares would easily cost upwards of $3,500. A woman weeping over a 3-day eviction notice does not possess the capital for premium air travel. Someone funded this invasion. I opened my contacts and scrolled down to the only family member who ever sent me a birthday card. My grandmother, Evelyn. She lived in a modest retirement community in Spokane, relying entirely on a fixed monthly pension. She had a soft heart and a trusting nature, 2 traits Brenda exploited frequently. I tapped her name and put the phone on speaker. It rang twice before her frail, familiar voice answered. "Amira, sweetheart. Oh, I am just so happy to hear your voice." Her tone was bright, filled with a sudden artificial hope. It made my stomach turn. "Hi, Nana," I said, keeping my voice steady and warm. "How are you doing today?" "I am just overjoyed, honey. Brenda called me a few hours ago. She told me the wonderful news. I have been crying happy tears all afternoon." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the mahogany desk. "What news did she share with you, Nana?" Evelyn let out a soft, relieved sigh. "She said you called her. She said you were weeping, begging her to forgive the past and asking her to come visit you so you could finally heal the family. She said you wanted to reconcile with her and Chloe, but you could not afford to fly them up to Alaska." The sheer magnitude of the lie hung in the air. Brenda did not just twist the truth. She fabricated an entire emotional reality to manipulate an 80-year-old woman. "Is that right?" I murmured, staring at the grain of the wood on my desk. "Yes, dear. She said it was an emergency, that you needed your mother right now. I know my pension is tight, but family is family." I went down to the bank and wired her $3,500 so she could buy the tickets for her, Chloe, and Trent. "I am just so proud of you for taking the first step to fix things, Almira." A cold fury settled into my bones. Brenda did not just abandon me as a child. She weaponized my trauma, using my imagined tears to rob her own mother. She drained an elderly woman's savings account to fund a parasitic vacation under the guise of maternal healing. I did not correct Evelyn. I did not want to break her heart or humiliate her by revealing that her own daughter had conned her out of her living expenses. I would handle Brenda myself. I would make sure Evelyn's money was returned with interest. "Thank you, Nana," I said softly. "I love you. I will talk to you soon." "I love you too, sweetheart. Have a beautiful reunion." I ended the call. The last trace of biological obligation evaporated from my conscience. They were not a family-seeking connection. They were a financial cartel looking for a new mark. I turned to my computer monitor and opened an aviation tracking website. I typed in the origin and destination. A digital map filled the screen, displaying a small white airplane icon crawling steadily across the Gulf of Alaska. Flight 492. It was currently cruising at 36,000 feet, carrying 3 passengers who believed they had outsmarted everyone. They expected to land in Anchorage and find the broken, desperate girl they threw away 23 years ago. They expected a soft target. They assumed I was living paycheck to paycheck in some frozen, desolate shack ripe for their exploitation. They intended to barge into my life, assert their dominance, and leech off my resources. I watched the altitude numbers on the screen begin to tick down. The plane was starting its descent. I stood up from my desk and walked over to the coat rack. I pulled down my heavy winter parka. If they wanted to play a game of deception, I would set the board. I would not block them at the airport. I would not flaunt my wealth or my security team. I would give them exactly what they expected to find. I would feed their arrogance, let them settle into their entitlement, and give them enough rope to tie their own knot. I picked up my keys, walked out of my luxury office, and headed toward the employee parking lot. I had a flight to catch. The Anchorage International Airport arrival curb is a chaotic stretch of concrete. I parked my vehicle in the loading zone and left the engine running. I did not drive my customary Range Rover. Instead, I brought a 2010 Subaru Outback. It served as a snowplow and utility hauler for my ground maintenance crew. The exterior paint was chipped, the rear bumper bore a prominent dent from a misjudged snowbank, and the interior smelled faintly of wet pine needles and industrial floor cleaner. It was the perfect stage prop. I stood by the front fender, letting the biting wind whip my hair around my face. I wore a faded flannel shirt and an older, scuffed, insulated jacket. The sliding glass doors parted. 3 figures stepped out into the freezing Alaskan evening. Brenda led the group. She wore a pristine white faux fur coat, looking like a woman expecting a red carpet rather than a frozen tundra. Behind her walked Chloe, my younger half-sister. Chloe dragged a designer suitcase with a broken wheel, her face pinched in discomfort. She wore thin leather boots entirely unsuited for the ice beneath her feet. Beside Chloe stood Trent, her husband. He wore a fitted designer tracksuit and held a premium coffee cup, making no effort to help his wife with her struggling luggage. Brenda spotted me. Her eyes swept over my faded jacket, darted to the rusted wheel wells of the Subaru, and settled into a look of profound pity. That single expression told me everything. She believed she had flown into a rescue mission where she would hold all the cards. She walked toward me with her arms outstretched. She wrapped me in a stiff, perfumed embrace. "Almira," Brenda sighed, stepping back to inspect my face. "You look so tired, sweetheart. And this cold. How do you live in this misery?" "It builds character," I replied smoothly, keeping my tone soft and submissive. "Let me help you with your bags." Chloe shoved her suitcase toward me without a word of greeting. "Watch the zippers. They cost more than that car," she muttered, pulling her scarf tighter around her neck. "Is the heater even working in that junk heap?" "It takes a few minutes to warm up," I said, lifting the heavy luggage into the trunk next to a pair of muddy jumper cables. "I am sorry it is not fancier. Money has been tight lately." Brenda exchanged a knowing glance with Chloe. It was a look of smug validation. They wanted me to be destitute. My poverty justified Brenda leaving me. If I was a failure, her abandonment was just a tragic circumstance, not a moral failing. Trent finally spoke, gesturing toward the back seat with his coffee cup.
"You expect all of us to fit in there? I have bad knees. I need leg room."
"It is only a 2-hour drive," I offered meekly, closing the trunk. "I will drive carefully." The journey out of Anchorage and into the deep wilderness provided ample opportunity for them to reveal their true nature. The heater in the Subaru rattled loudly, blowing lukewarm air into the cabin. Chloe complained endlessly from the back seat. She criticized the lack of cellular service, the rough suspension, and the smell of the upholstery. Brenda sat in the passenger seat, offering thinly veiled insults disguised as maternal advice. "You know, Almira," Brenda said, adjusting her designer sunglasses despite the setting sun, "Seattle has so many opportunities. You do not have to struggle out here in the middle of nowhere. I am sure Trent could find you an entry-level position at his firm. You could answer phones. It is honest work." Trent snorted from the back. "She would need to update her wardrobe first. No offense, Almira, but you look like a lumberjack." "None taken," I replied softly, gripping the steering wheel. I filed every word away, every insult, every slight, every arrogant assumption. I let them build their false reality. Chloe kicked the back of my seat. "We need to stop for groceries. I am starving. I only eat organic, and Trent needs his specific protein shakes." "You are paying, right? Since you dragged us all the way up here for this reunion." "I have some basics waiting for you," I said, evading the demand. "I stretched my budget to get you some nice things." Chloe scoffed. "Basics? Great. I hope you at least have decent Wi-Fi." We turned off the main highway onto a secluded, unpaved logging road. The Subaru bumped over deep ruts and snowdrifts. After 10 minutes of navigating through dense spruce trees, we arrived at our destination. It was a small, rustic staff cabin situated on the outermost edge, but it lacked every luxury my family expected. I parked the car and turned off the engine. The silence of the forest immediately surrounded us. "We are here," I announced. Brenda stared through the windshield, her jaw dropping slightly. "Here? You live here?" "It is modest," I said, opening my door, "but it keeps the wind out." Trent stepped out into the snow, looking around in disgust. "There is no paved driveway. Where's the nearest store? How do we order food?" "There is no delivery out here," I explained, carrying their bags onto the porch. "You have to cook your own meals. The stove is wood-burning, but I left you plenty of kindling." Chloe stood near the bumper, refusing to walk in the snow. "A wood-burning stove? Are you kidding me? What kind of savage lifestyle is this? I need room service. I need a hot shower. You expect me to chop wood?" "I am sorry," I said, lowering my gaze to the floorboards. "I truly am. This is the best I can offer right now. I thought you wanted to see my life. I thought you wanted to be a family." Brenda stepped onto the porch, waving a dismissive hand. "We do, sweetheart, but we are accustomed to a certain standard of living. It is just quite a shock to see how far you have fallen." I unlocked the heavy wooden door and pushed it open. The interior was clean but incredibly basic. A small kitchenette, a single bathroom with a temperamental water heater, and a lofted sleeping area. No television, no internet router. Just the quiet isolation of the Alaskan woods. "Settle in," I told them, leaving the keys on a small wooden table. "I have to head back to work for a few hours. I will check on you tomorrow." Chloe crossed her arms, shivering in the center of the room. "You are leaving us here? In this shack? What are we supposed to do for entertainment?" "There are some board games in the cupboard," I suggested softly. I backed out the door before they could formulate another demand. I walked down the steps and returned to the rusted Subaru. I started the engine, shifting the car into drive. I looked in the rearview mirror. Brenda was staring out the cabin window, her face contorted in a mix of horror and profound disappointment. They believed they had won. They believed they had established dominance over a weak, impoverished relative. They had no idea they were standing on a tiny, isolated sliver of my kingdom. I drove back down the unpaved logging road until the staff cabin disappeared behind the dense tree line. Once I hit the private security gate, I pressed a button on my sun visor. The heavy iron bars swung open, granting me access to the restricted inner grounds of Aurora Estates. The rough dirt path transitioned into smooth, heated asphalt that melted the falling snow on contact. I drove just over the high ridge, leaving the illusion of poverty far behind me. The landscape opened up to reveal my actual residence. My home was a breathtaking $4 million architectural masterpiece, constructed from imported timber and floor-to-ceiling reinforced glass. Warm golden light spilled from the expansive living room out onto the pristine snow. A private heated driveway curved toward a 4-car garage where my actual vehicles rested. I parked the old Subaru near the maintenance shed and walked up the illuminated stone pathway to my front door. The biometric scanner read my fingerprint, unlocking the custom oak entrance. I stepped inside. The air was perfectly climate-controlled. The faint scent of cedar and expensive vanilla filled the grand foyer. I took off my faded jacket and hung it in the closet, shedding the character of the struggling sister. I poured myself a glass of sparkling water from the marble kitchen island and walked over to my expansive living room windows. I looked out over the dark expanse of my property. Somewhere out there in the freezing woods, my mother and her golden family were huddling around a cold stove, plotting how to exploit a woman who did not exist. I took a slow, deliberate sip from my glass. The trap was set. Now, I just needed to let them spring it. The radiant floor heating of my master bathroom hummed quietly beneath my feet. I stood before the seamless glass mirror, brushing my hair, watching the dawn light paint the Chugach Mountains in shades of indigo and pale gold. My environment was a fortress of comfort. 2 miles away, inside a poorly insulated wooden box, my guests were likely shivering under thin wool blankets. I felt no pity. Pity is reserved for victims of circumstance. They were architects of their own discomfort. I walked into my home office and opened a heavy mahogany drawer. I pulled out a standard-issue black leather portfolio. I filled it with mundane operational paperwork, routine maintenance schedules for the resort generators, vendor supply lists for the dining room, and snow removal logs. It was the precise portfolio a mid-level property manager would carry. Into the front interior pocket, I slid a silver corporate credit card. It bore my name and the Aurora Estates logo. It had a limit high enough to purchase a luxury vehicle. Next, I picked up a small digital voice recorder. It resembled a standard USB flash drive. I activated the sound detection setting and slipped it into my coat pocket. I drove the rusted Subaru back down the logging road. The forest was silent, thick with fresh powder. I parked near the staff cabin and walked up the creaking steps, carrying a single paper bag of discount groceries. I pushed the door open. The interior was frigid. The wood stove had burned out hours ago. Brenda was huddled on the small sofa, wearing her faux fur coat over her pajamas. Chloe and Trent were tangled in sleeping bags in the loft, complaining about the draft. "Good morning," I said, setting the paper bag on the kitchen counter. Next to the bag, I casually placed the black USB drive, blending it perfectly with a pile of spare batteries and matches. I dropped the leather portfolio onto the small wooden dining table. I brought instant coffee and bread. I have to rush to my shift at the resort. The roads need plowing. Brenda glared at me, her lips pale from the cold. "You let the fire die!" "I was asleep," I replied evenly. "The extra firewood is on the porch. Have a good day." I did not wait for a response. I turned and walked out, letting the heavy door click shut behind me. I drove straight to the main security hub hidden beneath the Aurora Estates luxury lodge. The room hummed with server racks and glowed with dozens of high-definition monitors. I dismissed the overnight guard and sat at the primary console. I typed in a secure command. The screen in front of me split into 4 camera angles, providing a crystal-clear view of the staff cabin interior. I watched as my family dragged themselves out of bed. Trent rubbed his hands together, cursing the temperature. He refused to go outside for the firewood, opting instead to turn on the weak electric space heater. Chloe descended the loft ladder. Her hair was messy, her expression sour. She walked over to the grocery bag, peeked inside, and threw her hands up in disgust. She wanted artisanal pastries and fresh fruit. I gave them generic white bread and instant powder. Watching Chloe pout triggered a distinct realization of our contrasting realities. We shared the same mother, but we inhabited different planets. When Chloe turned 16, Brenda bought her a brand new European convertible wrapped in a giant red bow. When I turned 16, I was scrubbing industrial pots in the boarding school cafeteria to earn extra meal tokens. At 18, Brenda paid Chloe's full tuition to an expensive private university in California. Chloe lasted exactly 3 semesters. She dropped out because she despised waking up for morning lectures. She moved back home and met Trent. Trent was a man whose highest aspiration was standing in line for limited edition sneakers. Brenda financed their lavish wedding, drained her savings to pay their rent, and treated them like royalty. Chloe never faced a single consequence. She was conditioned to believe the universe owed her a frictionless existence. On the monitor, Chloe's boredom quickly morphed into systematic intrusion. Believing I was miles away pushing snow, she began tearing through the tiny cabin. She opened every drawer, rummaged through the small closet, and inspected the bathroom cabinets. She was hunting for cash, expensive liquor, or any hidden valuables she could pawn or consume. She found nothing but spare towels and canned soup. Frustrated, her eyes landed on the black leather portfolio resting on the dining table. She grabbed it. She unzipped the leather binding and began flipping through the pages. I zoomed the camera in on her face. I watched her lips move as she read the maintenance schedules and vendor contracts. A smirk crept across her features. "She is just a glorified janitor," Chloe announced to the room, tossing a page onto the table. "Look at this. She does not even own anything. She is just a property manager for that big resort up the road. She coordinates snowplows and orders toilet paper." Trent walked over, leaning over her shoulder. Brenda watched from the sofa, shaking her head in profound disappointment. They felt vindicated. My supposed lowly status cured their bruised egos. Then, Chloe's fingers found the interior pocket. She pulled out the silver corporate card. The atmosphere in the cabin shifted instantly. The complaining ceased. Chloe stared at the embossed numbers, tracing the Aurora Estates logo with her thumb. The card represented everything she felt she deserved. "What is that?" Trent asked, his eyes widening. "It is an expense card," Chloe said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "It has her name on it, but it belongs to the resort. It is corporate money." "Put that back, Chloe," Brenda said weakly from the couch. It was a performative objection. Her tone lacked any real authority or moral conviction. She was pretending to be a responsible parent while secretly hoping her daughter would secure a prize. "Are you kidding?" Chloe scoffed, slipping the silver card into the back pocket of her designer jeans. "She dragged us to this frozen hellhole. She forced us to sleep on lumpy mattresses and eat instant oatmeal. She owes us for being such a terrible sister. Besides, the resort pays the bill. Corporate entities write this stuff off all the time. They will not even notice." Trent grinned, clapping his hands together. "We deserve a real vacation. Let us get out of this shack." Chloe rationalized grand theft within 30 seconds. She did not view it as a crime. She viewed it as a belated inheritance. She felt entitled to compensation for the mere inconvenience of existing in a space that did not cater to her luxury standards. I sat in the glow of the security monitors. My heart rate did not elevate. My hands remained steady on the console keyboard. I watched my half-sister steal my financial property with zero hesitation. The trap was no longer just set. The prey had stepped directly onto the pressure plate. The video feed provided undeniable proof of the theft. But I needed more. Visuals capture the action, but audio captures the intent. I zoomed the camera out, focusing on the kitchen counter. The black USB device sat exactly where I left it, hidden in plain sight next to the bread. The voice-activated recorder was quietly spinning, capturing every whisper, every justification, and every plot they formulated while they believed they were alone. I leaned back in my chair and took a sip of my coffee. The game was escalating, and they were playing their hands perfectly. I returned to my primary residence just as the twilight faded into total darkness. The Alaskan winter sky above my estate was vast and starless, hinting at an approaching blizzard. The interior of my home offered a sanctuary of quiet warmth, a stark contrast to the bitter chill outside. The stone fireplace crackled, casting a soft orange glow across the vaulted timber ceiling and the polished slate floors. I walked into the kitchen, poured a single glass of dark red wine, and carried the crystal stemware into my private study. The drive back from the security hub had been uneventful. I retrieved the digital recorder from the staff dwelling during a brief afternoon stop while my uninvited guests were out exploring the resort boundaries. Now, the small black USB device rested in the palm of my hand. I inserted it into my laptop port. The audio files loaded onto the high-definition screen, neatly sorted by the device's sound activation software. I took a slow sip of my wine and clicked play on the longest file. The playback began with the harsh sound of a heavy wooden chair dragging across the rustic floorboards. Trent spoke first. His voice carried a smug, highly satisfied tone. He paced the small kitchen area, outlining his strategy to the women. He told Chloe and Brenda that the state had specific tenant laws they could exploit for their own financial gain. He explained the concept of adverse possession and squatter privileges with practiced, rehearsed ease. Trent possessed a unique expertise in this area. Back in Washington state, he spent 3 entire years avoiding eviction by weaponizing bureaucratic loopholes against independent property owners. He would sign a residential lease, pay the initial deposit to get the keys, and then drag the landlord through endless administrative court hearings while living rent-free. He knew exactly how to manipulate the American housing system to paralyze the legal owners. Now, he planned to apply that same parasitic methodology to my property. "She cannot kick us out if we establish a formal residency," Trent said through the computer speakers. "The weather outside is freezing. No judge in this jurisdiction will authorize a winter eviction without a prolonged legal fight. We stay right here. She will have to bring us food, water, and firewood just to keep us quiet. We live for free until the spring thaw, and there is nothing she can do to stop us." Brenda did not object to this criminal scheme. She murmured her agreement from the sofa. She justified the theft of my space by suggesting I owed them a comfortable place to stay after ignoring my family duties for so long. She validated his plan, proving her maternal instincts only extended to those who served her immediate comfort and financial stability. Chloe chimed in next. The clinking of a glass was audible in the background. Her focus remained fixed on the silver expense card tucked safely inside her pocket. She laid out her vision for the upcoming days. She intended to march down to the main lodge and demand premium treatments at the wellness center. "I'm going to book the hot stone massage, schedule the private helicopter tour over the glaciers, and order the most expensive champagne they keep in the cellar," Chloe bragged to her audience. "I will charge every single dollar to this corporate account. Almira is just a low-level employee. The headquarters accounting department will assume it is a legitimate operational expense for site maintenance or client entertainment. If they audit the books and find out the truth, they will fire her, not us. They cannot make her pay the balance back if she is broke. She will take the fall, and we get the luxury vacation we deserve. Listening to Chloe articulate her fraud felt deeply revealing. Growing up, Brenda shielded my half-sister from every negative consequence. When Chloe wrecked a leased sedan at 19 years old by driving intoxicated, Brenda took out a second mortgage to cover the property damages rather than let the local police handle the matter. That endless coddling birthed a predator. Chloe did not merely want a free trip to the mountains. She wanted to extract luxury at my expense and leave me to face professional ruin. She was willing to let me face felony wire fraud charges just so she could sip vintage wine in a heated pool. I paused the recording. The silence in my study felt profound and clarifying. A lesser person might have wept at the betrayal. A more reactive person might have driven down the logging road, kicked the front door open, and engaged in a bitter screaming match. I experienced none of those predictable impulses. Confrontation requires emotional investment. I possessed zero emotional investment in the three strangers plotting my demise. Their audacity extinguished any lingering ghost of familial obligation. They viewed my imagined poverty not as a tragic circumstance, but as an opportunity for a hostile takeover. I closed the media player and opened my encrypted email client. I drafted a brief, urgent message to Marcus, the lead attorney for Aurora Estates. Marcus was a brilliant, pragmatic legal mind who specialized in commercial real estate and corporate liability law. I requested an immediate virtual consultation to discuss a pressing security concern on the property. My laptop chimed 10 minutes later. Marcus appeared on the screen, sitting in his downtown Anchorage office adjusting his glasses. I explained the situation with clinical detachment. I detailed the unauthorized occupation of the staff structure and the calculated theft of the business credit card. I instructed Marcus not to alert the local authorities just yet. I wanted to build an inescapable legal enclosure first. I need a specific contract drafted tonight, I told him, looking directly into the camera lens. A document that legally reclassifies them from family guests to transient commercial lodgers. Marcus understood the assignment instantly. Under current state regulations, standard residential tenant protections do not apply to individuals occupying commercial hospitality structures under a short-term vacation rental agreement. If they signed a document acknowledging their status as commercial guests, Trent's dream of claiming squatter privileges would vanish into thin air. He would have zero legal standing to fight an eviction in a civil court. We spent the next hour drafting the paperwork to ensure it was airtight. We titled the document as a mandatory guest liability and wildlife hazard waiver. It looked exactly like a routine administrative form required by the local municipality for anyone staying near the protected wilderness preserve. The language focused heavily on bear safety, severe weather protocols, and emergency evacuation routes to bore and distract the reader. Buried deep within the dense legal formatting was a binding classification clause. The text explicitly stated the occupants held zero tenancy rights, agreed to a maximum 7-day stay, and accepted a $500 daily fine for trespassing upon revocation of the property owner's invitation. Furthermore, the contract stipulated that any fraudulent activity committed on the premises would result in immediate termination of the lodging agreement without prior notice. The trap was engineered to perfection. Marcus emailed me the final secure file. I printed the pages on thick official corporate letterhead using my office laser printer. The heavy paper gave the agreement an air of undeniable bureaucratic authenticity. I clipped the document to a sleek aluminum clipboard and attached a black ink pen. They thought they were outsmarting a defeated, uneducated property manager. They believed they held all the leverage and could dictate the terms of their survival on my land. They were about to sign away their only legal defense directly to the chief executive officer. I placed the clipboard on my desk and turned off the lights in my study. Tomorrow, I would deliver their eviction notice, disguised as a simple safety protocol. The morning light broke late over the Chugach Mountains, filtering weakly through the heavy snowfall. I stood in my kitchen, savoring a cup of French press coffee, while the freshly printed stack of liability waivers rested on the counter. The paper felt heavy, carrying the weight of a meticulously crafted legal mechanism. The documents appeared entirely unremarkable, resembling the standard bureaucratic forms any commercial guest would encounter when staying near protected wildlife habitats. I secured the pages onto the aluminum clipboard and retrieved my keys. The drive to the staff cabin was slow, the logging road buried under fresh powder. The rusted Subaru handled the drifts with rugged competence. As I approached the small wooden structure, I noticed a distinct lack of activity. No smoke curled from the chimney. The heavy snow on the porch remained undisturbed. They were awake, but they refused to engage with their environment. I knocked twice and pushed the heavy door open. The air inside was thick and stagnant, heated only by the inadequate electric space heater Trent had dragged into the center of the room. Brenda sat wrapped in a blanket on the small sofa, nursing a cup of the instant coffee I had provided yesterday. Chloe and Trent occupied the dining table, staring blankly at the frost-covered windows. Their expressions conveyed deep dissatisfaction. They looked like prisoners plotting an escape, completely unaware that I was the warden, holding the keys to their confinement. "Good morning," I announced, stepping onto the floorboards. I kept my voice flat, devoid of any warmth or hospitality. Trent turned his head, his eyes landing on the clipboard in my hand. "Are you bringing us a menu? Because that instant powder is an insult." "I am bringing administrative paperwork," I replied, pulling the pen from the clip. "Before I head to the resort for my shift, I need all three of you to sign this." Chloe rolled her eyes, crossing her arms over her chest. "Sign what? We are your family, not paying customers. What is this nonsense?" I placed the clipboard on the wooden table, pushing it toward them. "It is a guest liability and wildlife hazard waiver. It is a mandatory requirement from the local municipality for anyone occupying commercial structures situated near the Wilderness Preserve. It covers basic protocols for bear encounters, extreme weather emergencies, and outlines the evacuation routes." Brenda sighed dramatically from the couch, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "Amira, this is ridiculous. We are staying with you. We are not tourists." "The local government does not differentiate between blood relatives and tourists when it comes to property liability," I explained patiently, playing the role of the constrained, rule-following employee. "If a moose wanders onto the porch and someone gets injured, the property owner faces severe fines if the occupants have not signed the safety acknowledgement. I cannot risk my job over missing paperwork. Please, just sign it so I can file it with the front office." Trent pulled the clipboard closer, scanning the first page. His eyes glazed over as he encountered the dense paragraphs regarding seasonal bear activity and avalanche risks. He possessed a profound arrogance regarding legal matters, believing his previous successes in manipulating residential tenancy laws made him an expert in all civil codes. He did not read past the first section. He assumed it was exactly what I claimed, a boring, standard safety waiver designed to protect a faceless corporation from wildlife lawsuits. He had no idea that buried within the dense formatting on page 3 was a binding classification clause. The text explicitly defined the signatories as transient short-term lodgers, a designation that legally annihilated any possibility of claiming squatter privileges under state law. It restricted their occupation to a maximum of 7 days and implemented a severe penalty of $500 per day for trespassing following the revocation of the property owner's invitation. Furthermore, a subsequent paragraph stated that any fraudulent or criminal activity conducted on the premises would immediately void the lodging agreement, resulting in immediate expulsion without prior notice. Trent scribbled his signature on the bottom line with a dismissive flick of his wrist. There, you have your bureaucratic nonsense. Now, what are you going to do about the heat in this shack? I will bring more firewood this evening, I promised softly, taking the clipboard back. I handed it to Chloe. She did not even bother to look at the text. She grabbed the pen, scrawled her name, and shoved the clipboard back toward me. Her mind was entirely focused on the silver expense card hidden in her pocket. She viewed the paperwork as a minor annoyance delaying her grand plan. I carried the clipboard over to Brenda. She signed it with a heavy sigh, acting as though she was performing a massive favor for a difficult child. Thank you, I said, securing the pen. I will file these immediately. I hope you enjoy your day. I walked out of the cabin, the heavy wooden door shutting firmly behind me. I stood on the snowy porch and looked down at the 3 signatures securing my legal enclosure. They believed they were outsmarting a powerless property manager. They thought their arrival marked the beginning of a long, free ride at my expense. They had just voluntarily surrendered every single legal defense they possessed directly to the chief executive officer of Aurora Estates. I drove back to the main security hub, placing the signed documents into a fireproof safe. The legal snare was perfectly set. Now I needed to wait for the financial trap to snap shut. I returned to my private office overlooking the resort grounds and began reviewing architectural plans for a new luxury spa expansion. The morning passed quietly. The snow continued to fall, blanketing the wilderness in pristine white. At exactly 1:15 in the afternoon, my desktop phone chirped. It was a direct line from the front desk of the main lodge. I picked up the receiver. Miss Johnson. The voice of my lead concierge, Sarah, sounded hesitant. I apologize for interrupting your afternoon, but we have a situation at the reception desk that requires your attention. Go ahead, Sarah. What is the issue? A young woman just arrived at the lodge. She is quite demanding. She requested our premium wellness package, which includes the 2-hour hot stone massage, the glacial mud wrap, and a private helicopter tour over the Chugach Range for this afternoon. I leaned back in my chair, a slow, satisfied smile forming on my lips. Chloe was executing her plan with predictable greed. That sounds like a standard premium booking, I replied calmly. Is there a problem with availability? No, ma'am. We have the staff available. The issue is the payment method. When I asked for a credit card to hold the reservation, she presented a silver corporate expense card. It bears your name and the Aurora Estates logo. Sarah paused, clearly uncomfortable reporting what appeared to be internal theft. She claims she is your sister, Sarah continued, lowering her voice. She said you authorized her to use the corporate account for a family vacation. She demanded we charge the entire package to that card. Chloe's audacity was truly spectacular. She did not merely attempt to steal a few $100s. She aimed directly for the most expensive experiences the resort offered, entirely confident that my supposed lowly status would shield her from any consequences. She believed the faceless corporation would absorb the cost, and I would be left to face the reprimand. What is the total cost of the requested services, Sarah? I asked, pulling up the digital ledger on my screen. The premium wellness package, combined with the private helicopter charter, totals $4,200. She also requested a bottle of vintage champagne to be sent to her treatment room, which adds another $600. Nearly $5,000 in a single afternoon. Chloe was moving fast, eager to extract maximum luxury before anyone caught on. Did she sign the authorization slip? I inquired, keeping my tone perfectly measured. Yes, ma'am. I printed the standard authorization form. She signed it physically right in front of me. Did she sign her name or mine? There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. She signed Almira Johnson. The final piece of the puzzle locked into place. Chloe did not just misuse a corporate account. By forging my signature on a financial document to authorize nearly $5,000 in services, she crossed a significant legal threshold. She committed felony wire fraud and identity theft against a corporate entity. "Sarah," I said, my voice projecting absolute authority. "Process the transaction. Let the card go through. Give her the champagne, the massage, and the helicopter tour. Provide her with the highest level of service we offer." "Are you sure, Miss Johnson? The charges—" "I am entirely sure. Keep all the original signed receipts in a secure folder. Do not mention my actual position to her. Treat her exactly as she expects to be treated." I ended the call and placed the receiver back on the cradle. I turned my chair toward the expansive windows, watching the snow fall over the distant peaks. Chloe thought she was securing a life of luxury by exploiting my supposed weakness. She believed she was bankrupting a mid-level manager to fund her desires. Instead, she was happily compiling a mountain of federal evidence, and I was going to let her enjoy every single second of it before the bill came due. The main lodge at Aurora Estates was designed to emulate the grandeur of a 19th century alpine retreat, updated with modern architectural brilliance. A towering Riverstone fireplace anchored the room, surrounded by plush leather armchairs and a polished mahogany bar. I monitored the space through the closed-circuit feed in my office. Chloe had finished her hot stone massage and glacial mud wrap. She emerged looking relaxed, draped in a designer silk blouse she must have packed specifically for an occasion like this. She settled onto a bar stool, waving her hand to summon the bartender. She ordered a glass of vintage champagne, entirely unbothered by the price tag. She did not notice the older gentleman sitting 2 seats away, nursing a neat bourbon. He wore a simple cashmere sweater and wire-rimmed glasses. He looked like any other affluent retiree enjoying a quiet afternoon. He was not a tourist. His name was Arthur Pendleton. Arthur made his fortune in commercial shipping out of Seattle before retiring to the last frontier. He was also the primary financial backer of Aurora Estates. We met 6 years ago when I pitched the Eco-Lodge concept to a room full of skeptical venture capitalists. Arthur was the only one who saw my vision. He funded my initial construction phase and remained a silent partner, preferring the shadows to the spotlight. We shared a mutual disdain for entitlement and a deep appreciation for calculated strategy. Chloe swiveled her stool, scanning the room for opportunity. She possessed a predatory instinct for wealth, a trait honed by years of watching Brenda manipulate men for financial stability. Chloe identified Arthur's understated elegance. She recognized the Rolex on his wrist and the confident posture of a man who owned his surroundings. She leaned toward him, offering a practiced, dazzling smile. I watched the silent exchange on the screen and waited. 10 seconds later, my private cell phone vibrated. A text message from Arthur appeared. "A young woman just sat next to me. She is drinking the 2008 Dom Perignon and fishing for a conversation. She bears a slight resemblance to you, Almira. Should I be concerned?" I typed my reply quickly. "That is Chloe, my half-sister. Engage her. She believes I am a mid-level housekeeper who cleans the resort. See what she tells you." Arthur responded with a simple thumbs-up emoji. I adjusted the audio feed from the bar area, tuning out the ambient jazz music to isolate their voices. "It is such a gorgeous property," Chloe said, crossing her legs and holding her champagne flute by the stem. "I am visiting from the lower 48. My husband and I needed a winter getaway. Alaska is beautiful, but the local labor leaves a lot to be desired." Arthur took a slow sip of his bourbon. "Is that so? I have always found the staff here quite exceptional." Chloe let out a theatrical sigh. leaning closer to Arthur. "You only see the front of the house. I have insider knowledge. My older sister works here, Almira. She manages the housekeeping crew, or something equally mundane. She is a total disaster. We had to fly up here just to check on her because she lives in this freezing little shack down the road. It is honestly embarrassing. My mother is heartbroken over how far she has fallen." Arthur raised an eyebrow, projecting the perfect image of a sympathetic listener. "That sounds like a heavy burden for your family. It is admirable of you to support her." "We try," Chloe replied, taking a generous gulp of the expensive champagne. "But she is so ungrateful. We flew all this way and she threw us in a cabin with no heating and expected us to eat instant oatmeal. I told my husband I refused to suffer because of her poor life choices. I decided to come up here and experience the real Alaska." "A wise decision," Arthur noted smoothly. "Though I imagine the amenities here cost a pretty penny. You must be doing quite well for yourself." Chloe's eyes gleamed. She loved the implication of wealth. She loved the idea of impressing this sophisticated stranger. She leaned in even closer, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper, unaware that high-definition microphones were capturing every syllable. "Actually, I found a little loophole," Chloe bragged, tapping her manicured fingernail against the mahogany bar. "Almira left a corporate expense card sitting on the table this morning. She is so careless. I brought it with me. I have been charging everything to the resort corporate account. The massage, the helicopter tour, this champagne. The accounting department will just write it off as an operational expense. Almira will take the blame, but they cannot make her pay for it if she is broke. It is the least she owes us for putting us through this miserable trip." My phone buzzed again. Arthur sent another text. "She just confessed to corporate theft and wire fraud. Shall I call the sheriff?" I smiled, watching the digital numbers on my secondary monitor. The tab was growing. I replied to Arthur, "Not yet. Let her keep ordering the vintage Dom Perignon. The higher the bill, the tighter the knot." Arthur slid his phone back into his pocket. He turned his attention back to Chloe, offering a charming, grandfatherly smile. "That is quite a bold strategy, my dear. Are you not worried they check the signatures?" Chloe laughed, a sharp, dismissive sound that echoed in the quiet bar. "I just sign Almira's name. Nobody looks that closely. And even if they do, what are they going to do? Arrest a housekeeper over a few $1,000s? Corporate entities have insurance for this kind of thing. It is victimless." Victimless. She truly believed her actions carried zero weight. She spent her entire life insulated from the repercussions of her greed. When she wrecked that leased car years ago, Brenda absorbed the financial blow. When she dropped out of college, Brenda covered the wasted tuition. Now, she assumed a faceless corporation would absorb her luxury vacation, and her estranged sister would serve as the convenient scapegoat. I opened the central billing ledger on my computer. I tracked the incoming charges in real time. The glacial mud wrap and hot stone massage totaled $800. The private helicopter charter added $3,400. The initial glass of champagne was $85. Now she was ordering a second round. The total surpassed $4,300. In the state of Alaska, passing a forged document and obtaining services under false pretenses exceeding $1,000 constitutes a serious felony. Chloe was not just dipping her toes into petty theft. She was swimming in deep, prosecutable waters. I watched Arthur excuse himself from the bar, wishing Chloe a pleasant afternoon. He walked out of the camera frame, having executed his role flawlessly. Chloe remained seated, basking in her perceived victory, signaling the bartender for another refill. She was intoxicated by the champagne and her own perceived brilliance. I compiled the digital receipts, the signed authorization forms forwarded by the concierge, and the audio recording of her bar conversation. I placed them into a secure, encrypted folder on my desktop. The financial trap was closed. The legal snare at the cabin was set. The only remaining task was the delivery. My office calendar chimed, reminding me of the evening commitment. Tonight was the annual winter charity gala in the neighboring town. Aurora Estates served as the primary sponsor for the event, funding local conservation efforts. Every prominent politician, investor, and business owner in the region would be in attendance. Brenda had eagerly agreed to attend, hoping to find a wealthy Mark to fund her lifestyle, entirely unaware of my actual status. I stood up from my desk and smoothed the lines of my slacks. It was time to head back to the freezing staff cabin and help my family prepare for the most important social event of their lives. They wanted to rub elbows with the Alaskan elite. I was going to give them a front row seat. The late afternoon sky transformed into a deep, bruising purple. I guided the weathered utility vehicle back down the winding dirt path toward the boundary line. Tonight was the Winter Solstice Charity Gala. Held annually in the neighboring township, the event gathered the most influential figures in the region. State senators, venture capitalists, and local business moguls would converge in one room to raise funds for wilderness conservation. Aurora Estates underwrote the entire function. I paid for the catered salmon, the ice sculptures, and the rental of the historic ballroom. My uninvited relatives knew none of this. They simply knew a high society party was happening, and they wanted access. I stepped onto the wooden porch and pushed the cabin door ajar. The electric space heater hummed a weak tune against the corner wall. Brenda blocked the narrow entryway. She wore an expression of hardened entitlement, her arms crossed tight against her chest. She had spent the last 48 hours festering in a space she deemed beneath her dignity. Chloe sat at the dining table, filing her nails, radiating the smug satisfaction of a woman who just stole thousands of dollars in luxury services. Trent was nowhere to be seen, likely pacing the loft upstairs to avoid the cold draft. Brenda did not offer a greeting. She launched directly into a calculated offensive. "You are a profound disappointment," Brenda stated, her voice sharp enough to cut through the frozen timber. "I brought you into this world. I endured labor for you, and this is how you repay my sacrifice? You hide in the woods, working a dead-end job, forcing your own mother to sleep on a lumpy mattress." She took a step forward, invading my personal space. The scent of her heavy perfume filled the small room, masking the smell of the wood stove. "You were always a difficult child," she continued, her eyes narrowed in accusation. "A heavy burden I had to carry. I did the best I could, but you never appreciated my efforts. Now I am facing severe financial hardship, and you offer me generic bread and instant coffee. You owe me, Almira. I want the title to that Subaru. It is the least you can do to repay me for giving you life. I will sell it when we return to Seattle to cover my housing expenses." The word burden echoed in the cramped room. It acted as a key, unlocking a vault of memories I usually kept sealed. I was 12 years old again. A brutal winter storm had trapped the boarding school under 3 feet of snow. I contracted double pneumonia. My lungs filled with fluid, reducing my breath to a painful, shallow wheeze. The school nurse transported me to the rural county hospital. I lay in a sterile white bed, burning with a dangerous fever, terrified I was going to die alone. The attending physician allowed me to use the landline at the nurse's station. I dialed Brenda's Seattle number. It rang 5 times before she picked up. I managed to choke out my location, begging her to come. I heard a television playing loudly in the background. Brenda sighed into the receiver. She told me she was busy preparing for a holiday party and could not be bothered with my dramatics. Then, She hung up the receiver. The dial tone hummed against my ear, a continuous drone of rejection. I spent 5 days in that hospital ward, learning how to breathe on my own, while listening to the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor. The woman standing in front of me now held no power. The terrified 12-year-old child had died in that hospital bed, replaced by a woman who commanded an empire. I looked at Brenda. I did not raise my voice. I did not defend my choices. I offered her nothing but a cool, unblinking stare. My silence stretched, filling the room with an uncomfortable tension. Brenda shifted her weight, unnerved by my lack of reaction. She expected tears. She expected an apology or a bitter argument. I gave her a void. A predator relies on the struggle of its prey. When the prey simply stares back, the predator hesitates. "Are you planning to attend the charity gala tonight?" I asked, my tone perfectly even. The sudden shift in topic threw her off balance. Her eyes darted around the room, assessing my angle. "Of course we are going," Brenda replied, her greed instantly overriding her manufactured outrage. "It is a high society event. We belong there. Unlike you, we know how to conduct ourselves among successful people. There will be wealthy investors in attendance, men who actually know how to provide for a woman." Chloe stopped filing her nails and looked up, a predatory gleam flashing across her face. "We are going to network," Chloe added, smirking. "Maybe we will find someone to fund our actual vacation, someone who does not make us chop our own firewood." "I am sure you will make quite an impression," I said quietly. I turned around and walked out the door, leaving the keys to the Subaru on the porch railing. Let them take the vehicle. It belonged to the corporate fleet. If they attempted to sell it across state lines, they would only add Grand Theft Auto to their mounting list of transgressions. I drove a secondary utility truck back to my primary residence. The sun dipped below the horizon, plunging the Alaskan landscape into darkness. I stepped inside my heated home and prepared for the evening. My preparation was an exercise in precision. I showered in a glass enclosure overlooking the pine forest. I selected a custom-tailored designer gown from my walk-in closet. The fabric was a deep emerald green silk, cut to project authority and elegance. I secured my hair in a sleek, polished style and fastened a diamond necklace around my throat. The diamonds were flawless, purchased with the profits of my 3rd fiscal quarter. I looked in the mirror. I was the chief executive officer of a multi-million-dollar enterprise, ready to host my city. Miles away in the freezing cabin, my relatives were undoubtedly scrambling to assemble an illusion of grandeur. The venue was located in the heart of the neighboring township. The grand ballroom featured soaring ceilings, crystal chandeliers, and expansive floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing the falling snow. A fleet of black luxury sedans lined the circular driveway. Valets in tailored coats rushed to open doors for the arriving elite. I monitored the entrance via a live security feed on my mobile device while seated in the secure VIP lounge behind the main stage. The rusted Subaru sputtered up the pristine driveway, a glaring eyesore among the polished luxury vehicles. The engine idled roughly, sending a cloud of dark exhaust into the crisp night air. Brenda, Chloe, and Trent emerged from the beat-up car. Their attire was a tragic display of outdated vanity. Brenda wore a sequined dress that looked a decade out of fashion, paired with her stark white faux fur coat. Chloe had squeezed into a tight, metallic cocktail dress entirely inappropriate for a formal winter gala. She tottered on stiletto heels, shaking visibly against the freezing wind. Trent wore a shiny, ill-fitting suit that strained at the buttons. They looked exactly like people trying desperately to fake a status they had never earned. A valet approached the Subaru, holding out a ticket. Trent shoved past the young man, waving his hand dismissively. He tossed the keys onto the snowy pavement, expecting the staff to fetch them. Brenda marched up the sweeping stone staircase, her head held high, scanning the entrance for wealthy targets. They pushed through the heavy glass doors and entered the foyer, acting as if they owned the building. They were arrogant, entitled, and eager to conquer the room. They marched straight toward the grand ballroom, completely unaware that they were stepping onto a stage I had built, walking blindly toward a public reckoning engineered entirely by their own greed. The historic ballroom of the neighboring township glowed with a warmth that defied the freezing Alaskan night pressing against the tall, arched windows. Crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceiling, casting fractured light across the polished oak floors and illuminating the elite society of the region. State senators, venture capitalists, and legacy business owners mingled near towering ice sculptures that flanked the perimeter. Waitstaff in crisp, tailored vests circulated through the crowd, carrying silver trays of seared wild salmon, caviar, and vintage wines. It was a space defined by quiet power and understated wealth. I stood near the grand fireplace at the far end of the hall, engaged in a conversation with Arthur and the regional director of the Wildlife Conservation Board. My custom emerald silk gown draped perfectly against the floor. The diamond necklace resting against my collarbone caught the ambient light with every subtle movement. I kept my back angled toward the main entrance, utilizing the reflection in a gilded mirror above the mantel to monitor the arriving guests. Through the silvered glass, I watched Brenda, Chloe, and Trent breach the foyer. They moved with a desperate, frantic energy that immediately distinguished them from the rest of the room. They bypassed the coat check, refusing to part with Brenda's stark white faux fur coat, perhaps believing it lent her an air of sophistication. Instead, it marked her as an outsider. The trio gravitated instantly toward the open bar located near the center of the room. They recognized the free premium alcohol as an opportunity to indulge their unearned appetites. Trent leaned his elbows heavily against the polished mahogany counter, demanding top-shelf whiskey from the bartender without a polite greeting or a word of thanks. Chloe ordered a complicated martini, inspecting her manicured nails while the staff rushed to accommodate her. Brenda stood between them, holding a glass of Chardonnay, her eyes scanning the room with the practiced precision of a hawk searching for vulnerable prey. She was evaluating watches, tailored suits, and the subtle cues of wealth, eager to identify a benefactor who could solve her impending financial ruin. From my vantage point, I observed Chloe's gaze sweep across the ballroom and temporarily land on my silhouette. I remained turned away, sipping my sparkling water. Chloe stared at the back of my emerald dress, her expression souring into visible envy. She admired the cut of the silk and the effortless posture of the woman wearing it, possessing zero comprehension that she was coveting the sister she had spent the entire weekend degrading. She quickly looked away, seeking an audience for her fabricated narrative. Chloe found her target standing near a display highlighting the evening charity initiatives. Thomas Thorne, the town mayor, was reviewing the silent auction items. Mayor Thorne was a distinguished statesman with silver hair and a quiet, commanding presence. He was also a close personal friend. We spent countless hours in my private office negotiating zoning permits and funding strategies for local environmental protection programs. He knew my history, my business, and my face intimately. Chloe approached him with her martini in hand, offering a dazzling, rehearsed smile. She positioned herself to intercept his attention, projecting the illusion of a wealthy, charitable socialite visiting from the lower 48. The ambient acoustics of the ballroom allowed her shrill voice to carry over the gentle hum of the string quartet playing in the corner. "It is truly a lovely event," Chloe projected, gesturing toward the ice sculptures. "We flew up from Seattle just for the occasion. Alaska is charming, but the local workforce certainly lacks refinement." Mayor Thorne turned toward her, his expression a mask of polite curiosity. He held a glass of mineral water, assessing the young woman in the metallic cocktail dress. "We take great pride in our community," he replied in a steady, measured tone. "What brings you to our township?" Chloe let out a theatrical sigh, swirling the olive in her glass. She leaned closer, eager to spin her web of deception to a man she correctly identified as a local authority figure. "We are here on a family rescue mission," Chloe explained, her voice dripping with manufactured pity. "My older sister is a total deadbeat. Her name is Almira. She manages the housekeeping crew at that big resort down the highway. She lives in this freezing, pathetic little shack in the woods. My mother and I had to travel all this way just to check on her. It is honestly exhausting trying to support someone who refuses to apply herself." Mayor Thorne did not blink. He did not break eye contact. He simply stared at Chloe, absorbing the sheer magnitude of the lie she had just confidently delivered. He knew the woman she was describing funded the very event they were standing in. He knew the woman she called a deadbeat housekeeper commanded a multi-million-dollar enterprise that sustained half the local economy. A profound look of confusion washed over his face, quickly followed by a deep, settling pity. He was looking at a predator who had wandered into a trap she could not comprehend. "Is that so?" Mayor Thorne asked softly. "You must find it very challenging, carrying such a burden."
"You have no idea," Chloe laughed, misinterpreting his pity for admiration. "She could not even afford to heat the cabin she forced us to stay in. But we decided we would not let her failures ruin our trip. We wanted to come tonight to mingle with the real contributors of this society." "I assure you," the mayor said, offering a tight, knowing smile, "the real contributors are watching everything very closely." He excused himself with a polite nod, walking away from Chloe before she could extract any further validation. Chloe beamed, returning to Trent and Brenda at the bar, convinced she had successfully charmed a prominent local figure. My attention shifted from the bar as the gentle music of the string quartet faded into silence. The low murmur of the ballroom hushed. The event organizer, a tall man in a tailored tuxedo, stepped up to the acrylic podium situated at the center of the grand stage. He tapped the microphone. The sound resonated through the hall, signaling the beginning of the formal presentations. Brenda reacted to the shift in atmosphere instantly. She recognized the rhythm of a high society function. She knew the speeches preceded the introduction of the primary donors. She set her empty wineglass on a passing silver tray and began shouldering her way through the crowd. She pushed past local business owners and philanthropic board members, ignoring their irritated glances. She wanted a front row position. She was hunting for the mysterious owner of Aurora Estates, banking on the strategy that a tragic sob story and a tearful plea could extract a generous handout from a wealthy billionaire. Her history was defined by this exact tactic. Brenda never sought employment. She sought saviors. She discarded me at a boarding school because my existence complicated her pursuit of a man who promised to pay her debts. Now, decades later, her survival strategy remained entirely unchanged. She stood at the edge of the stage, her faux fur coat draped over her shoulders, her eyes wide with greedy anticipation. The master of ceremonies cleared his throat, reading from a gilded card. "Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, thank you for joining us on this beautiful winter evening," the organizer began, his voice projecting across the silent audience. "Tonight, we gather to celebrate the preservation of our pristine wilderness. But this event, and the conservation programs it funds, would not be possible without the unparalleled generosity of our primary benefactor." Brenda leaned forward, holding her breath. She adjusted her posture, preparing to intercept whoever walked down the center aisle. "This individual did not just build a premier destination," the organizer continued, gesturing toward the center of the room. "She built a legacy of sustainability, resilience, and unyielding strength.
She transformed a vision into an empire that supports our entire community. The main chandelier above the dance floor dimmed. A crisp, brilliant white spotlight ignited from the balcony overhead. It swung across the polished oak floor, cutting through the darkness. It swept past the bar. It passed over the local politicians. It bypassed Brenda entirely. The beam of light settled firmly on the far end of the room, illuminating the emerald silk gown and the diamond necklace resting against my throat. I turned away from the gilded mirror. I faced the crowd, holding my head high, stepping directly into the brilliant illumination. The announcer's voice echoed through the silent hall. Please welcome our visionary CEO and founder of Aurora Estates, Almira Johnson. The brilliant beam of the spotlight illuminated the emerald silk of my gown, pinning me against the dark backdrop of the grand hall. The string quartet ceased playing. The ambient chatter of the region's most powerful figures evaporated into a breathless hush. I did not look at the stage. I kept my gaze fixed on the reflection in the gilded mirror above the fireplace, watching the exact moment reality fractured the illusion my family had constructed. The color drained entirely from Brenda's face. Her jaw parted, leaving her mouth hanging open in a silent, grotesque mask of shock. The smug confidence that had defined her posture all evening crumbled, replaced by the terrified realization that she had walked blindly into a devastating snare. Beside her, Chloe lost all motor function. Her fingers went slack. The expensive crystal martini glass slipped from her grasp. It struck the polished marble floor with a sharp, echoing crack, shattering into hundreds of glittering shards. Clear liquid splashed across the hem of her metallic dress and onto Trent's scuffed leather shoes. None of them moved to clean it up. They stood frozen, staring at the woman they had spent 48 hours mocking, belittling, and attempting to exploit. I turned away from the mirror. I walked slowly down the center aisle toward the acrylic podium. The crowd parted respectfully. State senators nodded in my direction. Local business owners offered warm smiles of recognition. I felt the weight of their gazes, but it was not a heavy burden. It was the solid, affirming presence of a community I had earned through years of relentless discipline. I ascended the short staircase and stepped behind the microphone. I looked out over the sea of upturned faces. In the third row, I saw Arthur raise his bourbon glass in a silent, approving toast. Near the back, standing beside the shattered glass, my biological relatives looked like cornered animals, their eyes wide with disbelief. "Thank you," I began, my voice carrying clear and steady through the sound system. "Alaska is an unforgiving frontier. It tests our endurance. It challenges our limits. But it also offers a profound truth. In this harsh environment, you cannot survive on empty promises. You cannot endure the winter by relying on the labor of others while contributing nothing yourself." I paused, letting the words settle over the silent room. I directed my gaze straight toward the back of the hall. "When I first arrived in this territory, I had nothing," I continued, maintaining a calm, measured rhythm. "I learned very quickly that true warmth is not handed to you. You must build the shelter. You must chop the wood. You must lay the foundation with your own hands." I built Aurora Estates on the principle of self-reliance. We created a sanctuary not by extracting resources, but by cultivating them. We forged a community grounded in mutual respect, hard work, and accountability. I thought about the decade I spent sweeping the floors of that boarding school while Brenda lived in a heated Seattle townhouse. I thought about the rusted utility vehicle they complained about and the isolated cabin they deemed beneath their dignity. "There are those who believe the world owes them comfort," I said, my tone sharpening into a precise edge. They view the success of others not as an inspiration, but as an unfair distribution of wealth. They arrive with empty hands and demanding voices, expecting to harvest fields they never planted. But tonight, we celebrate the builders. We honor the individuals who understand that true legacy is earned, never demanded. The applause started before I even finished the final sentence. It swelled into a thunderous ovation. Mayor Thorne stood up, leading the room in a standing tribute. I offered a single, graceful nod to the audience, stepped away from the podium, and walked down the side stairs toward the private VIP section. The VIP area was a secluded alcove near the tall arched windows, separated from the main floor by velvet ropes. I accepted a glass of sparkling water from a passing waiter and waited. It took less than 2 minutes for the storm to arrive. Brenda, Chloe, and Trent shoved their way through the applauding crowd, ignoring the irritated protests of the regional elite. They ducked under the velvet rope, their faces flushed with a frantic, chaotic energy. A rational person facing such a profound miscalculation would experience shame. A normal family would retreat, humiliated by their own staggering ignorance. But my relatives did not possess the capacity for self-reflection. Instead of being humbled, their entitlement mutated into a fierce, blinding rage. They felt cheated. They felt robbed of an opportunity they believed was their birthright. Brenda breached my personal space first, her faux fur coat slipping off one shoulder. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of raw greed. "You hid this from us," Brenda hissed, her voice vibrating with genuine fury. "You let us sleep in that freezing shack. You let us eat instant food. You intentionally humiliated your own mother while you sit here wearing diamonds. Why did you hide your wealth from us?" She did not ask how I achieved such success. She did not express a single ounce of maternal pride. Her only concern was the delayed access to my financial resources. "I did not hide anything," I replied softly, taking a sip of my water. "I simply matched the exact level of effort and care you provided me for the last 23 years. I gave you a roof. I gave you food. It is far more than you ever gave me." Brenda's eyes narrowed into dark, hateful slits. The mask of the concerned parent vanished entirely. "I gave you life," Brenda declared, pointing a shaking finger at my chest. "I brought you into this world. Everything you have built, every dollar in your bank account, exists because of me. You owe me compensation for the years I sacrificed raising you. I am entitled to half of this company. I will hire a lawyer. I will take what belongs to me." The delusion was staggering. She truly believed her biological contribution entitled her to 50% of an empire she did not even know existed an hour ago. Before I could respond, Chloe pushed past her mother. The spilled martini had stained the front of her dress, but she ignored the damp fabric. Her face twisted into an ugly sneer. When Chloe was 19, she demanded a brand new luxury sedan from a dealership. When Brenda delivered a model with a black interior instead of the requested beige, Chloe threw a horrific tantrum, claiming the mistake caused her severe emotional distress. She forced her mother to return the vehicle and pay a premium restock fee. Chloe operated under the firm belief that any deviation from her exact desires warranted heavy financial compensation. "You set us up!" Chloe screamed, her voice shrill enough to draw the attention of the nearest guests. "You tricked us. You played a sick, psychological game, pretending to be broke just to mock us. Do you know how traumatizing it was to stay in that cabin? You owe me $1 million for this deception. I am not leaving this state until you wire the funds into my account." Trent stood behind them, shifting his weight nervously. He looked around the opulent room, calculating the immense power differential. He finally realized they were no longer bullying a lonely girl in a Seattle suburb. They were threatening a corporate titan in her own fortress. "Chloe, keep your voice down," Trent muttered, reaching for his wife's arm. "Do not tell me to calm down," Chloe snapped, pulling away from him. She stepped closer to me, her fists clenched at her sides. "Write the check, Almira, or I will go to the press. I will tell everyone in this room how you treat your own flesh and blood." I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice to match her hysteria. I remained a void of emotion, absorbing their frantic demands without yielding a single inch of ground. I raised my right hand and offered a subtle, silent gesture to the shadows near the alcove entrance. 2 men stepped forward. They wore tailored dark suits and discreet earpieces. They stood 6 feet 4 inches tall, possessing the broad, unmovable physical presence of trained security professionals. They moved with silent efficiency, stepping between my family and myself. They formed a solid, impenetrable human wall, crossing their hands in front of them. Brenda gasped, stumbling backward. Chloe froze, her threats dying in her throat as one of the guards stared her down with blank, professional indifference. The physical boundary was established. The chaotic energy of their assault broke against the discipline of my defense. "You cannot hide behind hired muscle," Brenda stammered, her false courage faltering. "We are your family. We demand an explanation." "You do not get to make demands on my property," I said calmly, stepping around the edge of the security detail so they could see my face. I reached into my designer evening clutch. I bypassed the lipstick in the mirror. My fingers located the cold, sleek aluminum frame of my digital tablet. I pulled the device out, the screen illuminating my features in the dim light of the alcove. They wanted an explanation. They wanted to rewrite history, to cast themselves as victims of a cruel deception. They were about to discover that I did not rely on emotional arguments. I relied on the brutal, inescapable weight of recorded facts. I unlocked the screen with my thumbprint. I opened the encrypted folder on the desktop. The audio files, the financial ledgers, and the signed legal contracts waited in perfect digital order. "You want to discuss what is owed," I whispered, the cool glow of the screen reflecting in their panicked eyes. "Let us review the accounting." The sleek aluminum tablet felt cool against my palm. Its screen cast a sharp, sterile light across the faces of the 3 people standing opposite my security detail. The surrounding guests in the VIP alcove had stopped their conversations. State senators, regional executives, and philanthropic board members lingered near the velvet ropes, their attention captured by the unfolding drama. They formed a silent audience for a performance my biological relatives never intended to stage. I tapped the smooth glass surface, opening the first digital folder. "You demand a share of this empire based on maternal devotion," I stated, my tone reflecting a surgical detachment. "You claim a lifelong dedication that entitles you to financial reward. Let us examine the official record of that dedication." I turned the screen outward, displaying a digitized ledger. The document bore the official seal of the St. Elias Mountain Academy. "The institution where you left me maintained strict administrative protocols," I explained, projecting my voice just enough to carry to the onlookers. "Due to its remote location, the administration logged every single piece of incoming mail, every phone call, and every physical visitor to ensure student safety. I retrieved these archives directly from the State Educational Registry." Brenda stared at the illuminated spreadsheet. The columns were sorted by year, tracking a full decade of my childhood. 10 years, I said, pointing to the blank spaces beside my name. 3,650 days. 0 visits, 0 phone calls, 0 letters. You did not even send a signature authorizing my emergency medical treatment when my lungs failed. The objective truth of the ledger stripped away her lifelong narrative. Faced with undeniable proof, Brenda resorted to her most practiced defense mechanism. She attempted to solicit pity. Her lower lip quivered. She looked past me, directing her performance toward the affluent crowd lingering nearby. "I was struggling," Brenda cried out, raising a trembling hand to her chest. "I was a young mother facing profound financial hardship in Seattle. The flights were expensive. The roads were dangerous. I did the best I could under impossible circumstances." You cannot judge a mother for making difficult choices to survive. A few older guests near the perimeter shifted their weight, their faces showing brief flashes of sympathetic discomfort. Brenda recognized the hesitation. She believed her tears were working. She thought she could manipulate the room by weaponizing her perceived vulnerability. I did not allow the illusion to take root. I tapped the tablet screen a second time. The device paired instantly with the alcove's secondary Bluetooth sound system. A sharp burst of static crackled through the overhead speakers, followed immediately by the clear, unmistakable sound of a heavy chair scraping across rustic floorboards. Trent's voice echoed through the elegant space. "We stay right here. She will have to bring us food, water, and firewood just to keep us quiet. We live for free until the spring thaw, and there is nothing she can do to stop us." Trent's eyes widened in sheer terror. He stepped backward, bumping into a marble pillar. The color vanished from his cheeks. He recognized his own calculated instructions playing for an audience of powerful lawmakers and investors. The recording continued without interruption. Chloe's distinct, shrill laughter filled the air. "Almira is just a low-level employee. The headquarters accounting department will assume it is a legitimate operational expense. If they audit the books and find out the truth, they will fire her, not us. She will take the fall, and we get the luxury vacation we deserve." Brenda's voice followed, offering a soft murmur of agreement to the criminal conspiracy. I pressed the screen, silencing the audio feed. The atmosphere in the VIP alcove shifted instantly. The brief flicker of sympathy from the onlookers hardened into profound disgust. A prominent real estate developer shook his head in silent reprimand. The wife of a local judge covered her mouth, her expression conveying pure shock. The high society crowd recognized the difference between a struggling parent and a coordinated group of parasites. Brenda's victim narrative disintegrated, replaced by the chilling reality of premeditated exploitation. "You did not come to Alaska seeking a family reunion," I said, my gaze sweeping over the three of them. "You came to execute a hostile takeover. You plotted to claim adverse possession of my property and orchestrate my professional termination to fund a holiday." Brenda opened her mouth, searching for a defense, but no words materialized. The recording shattered her credibility. She looked at Trent for support, but her son-in-law was busy staring at the floor, attempting to shrink into the background. I shifted my focus to the woman, trembling in the stained metallic cocktail dress. Chloe clutched her small evening bag, her breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. "Your ambition, however, surpassed mere trespassing," I noted, opening the next file on my device. I rotated the tablet toward Chloe. The screen displayed a high-resolution scan of the Aurora Estates Premium Wellness Authorization Slip. At the bottom of the page sat a rushed, looping signature reading Almira Johnson. Alongside the signature was a digital tally of her afternoon indulgence. $4,385, I read aloud, treating the numbers with deliberate precision. "You charged a glacial mud wrap, a hot stone massage, a private helicopter charter, and 2 bottles of vintage champagne to a corporate account you stole from my desk." Chloe swallowed hard, her throat bobbing. She raised her chin, attempting a final, desperate bluff. "It is a corporate write-off. Your boss has insurance for unauthorized charges. You are just a property manager. They cannot hold you responsible for a family misunderstanding. That is the core of your miscalculation, I replied, my voice dropping to a cooler, sharper register. I am not a mid-level manager. I gestured to the ballroom around us, the opulent fixtures, and the attentive staff waiting near the perimeter. I own the desk you stole the card from. I own the lodge where you drank the champagne. I own the helicopter that flew you over the glaciers. You thought you were bankrupting a lowly housekeeper. Instead, you committed felony wire fraud and identity theft against a multi-million-dollar corporate entity. Chloe stumbled backward, her stilettos wobbling on the polished oak. Her mind struggled to process the magnitude of the legal threshold she had just crossed. In the state of Alaska, passing forged financial documents exceeding $1,000 triggered immediate, severe prosecutorial action. She had not stolen from a helpless sibling. She had defrauded a registered enterprise. "She is lying!" Chloe shrieked, her voice cracking under the pressure. She looked frantically around the room, desperate for an ally. "She gave me permission. I told the man at the bar. We had a verbal agreement. Someone confirm it!" A figure stepped forward from the edge of the crowd. Arthur Pendleton moved with the unhurried grace of a man who held undeniable authority. He straightened his cashmere sweater, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses as he approached the confrontation. The guests parted for him, recognizing the primary financial backer of the region's largest conservation fund. Chloe recognized him instantly. Her face lit up with a sudden, frantic hope. "You!" Chloe pleaded, pointing a trembling finger at him. "You were at the bar. You heard me say it was a corporate expense. Tell them she is exaggerating." Arthur stopped beside me, offering Chloe a polite, devastating smile. "I remember our conversation vividly," Arthur said, his tone carrying the seasoned weight of a corporate titan. "I recall you bragging about stealing an expense card from a sister you deemed a disaster. I recall you explicitly stating your intention to let her take the fall for your unauthorized purchases. You detailed your entire fraudulent scheme over a glass of Dom Perignon." Chloe's hope shattered. Her breath hitched, a sharp gasp of pure panic escaping her lips. "As the silent partner and primary investor of Aurora Estates," Arthur continued, his eyes locking onto Chloe with clinical detachment, "I find your actions deeply concerning from a liability standpoint. Fortunately, I documented the entire interaction. The horror of true legal accountability finally set in. The trio realized they were trapped in an enclosure constructed of their own greed, surrounded by witnesses who wielded genuine structural power. Trent backed further away, creating physical distance between himself and his wife, implicitly abandoning her to face the consequences alone. Chloe buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking as the reality of a felony charge crushed her manufactured reality. Brenda watched her golden child collapse. She saw her son-in-law retreat. She looked at the elite crowd staring at her with unvarnished contempt. Her control over the situation had evaporated entirely. The narrative was lost. The financial rescue was dead. Driven by a sheer, frantic desperation to reclaim the upper hand, Brenda's eyes darted wildly around the alcove. She refused to accept defeat. If she could not manipulate the audience, she would summon a higher authority. Brenda plunged her hand deep into her white faux fur purse, her fingers grasping the cold plastic of her mobile phone, preparing to execute a final, catastrophic maneuver. Brenda's fingers dug into the silk lining of her white faux fur purse. She retrieved a smartphone, her thumb swiping across the glass surface with erratic, shaking motions. When a seasoned manipulator realizes their audience sees right through their facade, they do not offer an apology. They change the theater. They elevate the stakes until the sheer audacity of their lie forces people to pay attention. Brenda intended to orchestrate a public crisis, hoping the ensuing chaos would provide an escape route. She pressed 3 digits and activated the external speaker function. The rhythmic ringing of the emergency line echoed through the hushed VIP alcove. The surrounding politicians and business leaders watched in bewildered silence. "County Emergency Dispatch, what is your location?" A professional, disembodied voice cut through the tension. Brenda unleashed a master class in theatrical sorrow. She forced a raw, breathless sob into the microphone, clutching the device close to her chest. "Please, you must send officers to the Winter Charity Gala immediately," Brenda cried, her voice trembling with practiced vulnerability. "My name is Brenda. I am an elderly woman, and I am being held against my will. My daughter, Almira Johnson, is committing elder financial abuse. She stole my entire life savings. She forced me into a freezing shack without heat or food. She stole my company from me. Please, she has hired thugs who are threatening my life right now." This maneuver was her signature survival tactic. Years ago, whenever her reckless spending resulted in a legitimate eviction notice back in Washington state, she would stand on her front lawn and weep to the passing neighbors. She would claim her landlords were ruthless monsters targeting a vulnerable, destitute mother. She weaponized pity to extract loans from sympathetic onlookers, dodging accountability by wearing the mask of a helpless victim. She assumed the elite Alaskan crowd would rush to protect a crying, fragile elder from a tyrannical corporate executive. Instead of rushing to her aid, the regional moguls simply stared. They knew the truth of my history. They knew I built Aurora Estates from empty, frozen land while she was nowhere to be found. A tall figure detached himself from a group of state representatives near the arched windows. He wore a crisp, dark dress uniform adorned with a gold star badge. Sheriff Holden served as the chief law enforcement officer for the municipality. We collaborated frequently on search and rescue protocols for the wilderness preserve, sharing a mutual respect for order and community safety. He understood the operational integrity of my enterprise better than anyone in the room. Sheriff Holden walked toward Brenda with slow, measured steps, projecting an aura of unshakable authority. He did not look concerned. He looked profoundly weary of the disruption. Brenda looked up, tears streaming down her cheeks, expecting a uniformed savior to arrest me on the spot. Holden reached out and gently plucked the glowing smartphone from her grasp. He lifted the device to his mouth, bypassing her entirely. "Dispatch, this is Unit 1. Holden stated, his low, rumbling baritone commanding instant obedience. "I am on scene at the ballroom. The situation is secure. Cancel the response. We are Code 4. He terminated the call and handed the silenced device back to my stunned mother. "Ma'am," Sheriff Holden warned, his eyes narrowing beneath the brim of his hat. "Filing a false police report is a serious offense in this jurisdiction. I suggest you choose your next words with extreme caution." Brenda sputtered, her fabricated tears drying instantly upon realizing her performance had failed. "She stole my business! She is abusing me!" I stepped forward, closing the physical distance between myself and the officer. I did not engage with her delusional accusations. I presented the sleek aluminum tablet, turning the screen toward the law enforcement official. "Sheriff Holden," I said evenly, maintaining a calm, professional demeanor, "I would like to report a felony wire fraud and an instance of corporate identity theft. The perpetrators are standing right here." Holden nodded, retrieving a small notepad from his breast pocket. "Go ahead, Almira. Show me what you have." I scrolled to the high-resolution scans provided earlier by my concierge desk. This afternoon, that young woman in the metallic dress presented a stolen corporate expense card at my wellness center, I explained, gesturing toward Chloe. She forged my signature on this exact document to authorize over $4,000 in luxury services. The stolen plastic is currently residing in her back pocket. I tapped the screen again, pulling up the sound file. Furthermore, they trespassed on commercial property and conspired to claim illegal residency to extort my business, I continued. I have their full confession recorded on audio, detailing their intent to ruin my professional standing and burden the company with their debts. Finally, I reached into my clutch and retrieved the folded, printed guest liability and wildlife hazard waiver. I handed the physical paper to the officer. To ensure there is no confusion regarding their tenancy status, I concluded, here is the binding contract they signed this morning. It clearly classifies them as transient, short-term lodgers. They have zero squatter protections, and the contract subjects them to immediate expulsion for any fraudulent activity committed on the premises. Sheriff Holden reviewed the evidence with practiced, clinical efficiency. He read the forged signature on the digital scan. He listened to the brief, damning playback of Chloe plotting the theft. He examined the liability waiver, noting the 3 distinct signatures at the bottom of the page. The chain of evidence was flawless, undeniable, and legally binding. He shifted his focus from the illuminated screen to the trembling young woman. Chloe shrank back, her previous bravado shattered into a million pieces. The spilled martini made the floor slick, causing her to stumble as the uniformed officer approached. "Miss," Holden commanded, extending an open palm. "Hand over the silver expense card." Chloe reached behind her with shaking fingers. She retrieved the Aurora Estates card and dropped it into the officer's hand as if the plastic burned her skin. Holden inspected the embossed name, verifying my identity on the stolen property. He reached toward his utility belt. The sharp, metallic clinking of steel breaking free from a leather pouch sliced through the quiet alcove. It was a sobering, terrifying sound that signaled the end of their game. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back," Holden instructed. The command was not a request. It was an inevitable consequence. Chloe let out a piercing, hysterical shriek. The reality of a criminal charge broke through her lifelong shield of entitlement. "No!" Chloe screamed, thrashing her shoulders and stepping away from the officer. "It is a mistake! She told me I could use it! Mom, do something! Tell him she is lying!" Brenda stood, paralyzed, her mouth opening and closing without producing a single sound. Her ultimate maneuver had backfired, transforming her from a fake victim into a witness to her daughter's arrest. Holden did not tolerate the resistance. He expertly secured Chloe's left wrist, pulling her arm backward with firm professional force. He snapped the steel bracelet shut. The ratcheting sound echoed over the soft jazz music that had resumed playing in the main hall. He secured her right wrist a second later, locking her arms in place. "You are under arrest for felony wire fraud and identity theft," Holden recited, his voice steady over her continuous sobbing. Trent witnessed his wife being restrained by local law enforcement. He realized the severe legal jeopardy surrounding them. A husband devoted to his partner might have stepped forward to defend her or demanded to call an attorney. But Trent was a parasite who thrived on easy victories and manipulated loopholes. He recognized a losing battle, and his instinct for self-preservation overrode any marital loyalty. He did not speak. He did not offer comfort. Trent took one step backward, then another, retreating into the shadows of the velvet ropes. He abandoned his bride, his face pale with sheer terror, eager to create physical distance between himself and the wreckage of their greed. He knew they had played a game way out of their league, and he was ready to run. The ratcheting sound of steel locking against bone signaled the end of Chloe's manufactured reality. Sheriff Holden held her arms firmly behind her back, securing the handcuffs with practiced efficiency. She struggled against his grip, her metallic cocktail dress bunching awkwardly around her waist. She pleaded with her husband, her voice a shrill note of panic echoing over the soft jazz music playing from the corner speakers. Trent remained frozen near the velvet ropes. He avoided her gaze, staring intently at the polished oak floorboards. He recognized a sinking ship. He possessed a survival instinct honed by years of dodging landlords and debt collectors back in Washington state. Standing by his wife meant sharing her legal jeopardy. He chose self-preservation, abandoning his bride to face the criminal justice system alone. The wealthy guests watched the young woman weep. Her expensive makeup ran in dark streaks down her cheeks, staining her collar. She was no longer a glamorous socialite sipping vintage champagne and networking with billionaires. She was a criminal suspect caught passing forged documents in a room full of the very people she tried to deceive. Brenda watched her golden child succumb to law enforcement. The grand rescue mission had disintegrated into a spectacular public disaster. The regional benefactors she hoped to court were staring at her with profound disgust. She had exhausted her arsenal of manipulation. She could not intimidate me. She could not outsmart my corporate legal team. She could not leverage local authorities. Stripped of her usual tactics, she resorted to the oldest theater in her repertoire. Brenda surrendered her remaining dignity. She collapsed. Her knees struck the marble floor with a heavy thud. The pristine white faux fur coat slipped from her shoulders, pooling around her waist like a discarded costume. She clasped her hands together, looking up at me through a veil of manufactured tears. "Please, Almira," Brenda sobbed, her voice cracking under the weight of her performance. "I am so sorry. I was wrong. I was terrified and confused by this entire situation. But we are blood. You cannot do this to your own mother. You cannot let them take your sister away to a jail cell. Family must stick together. Family must stick together." The phrase hung in the chilled air, a hollow platitude spoken by a woman who fractured our bloodline 2 decades prior. I looked down at her. I saw the cheap sequins on her outdated dress catching the chandelier light. I remembered standing in the gravel driveway of the St. Elias Mountain Academy. I remembered the biting winter wind sinking into my 8-year-old bones as her taillights disappeared down the mountain road, leaving me among strangers. She did not stick together with me when my lungs filled with fluid. She did not stick together with me on my high school graduation day when I stared at an empty chair. "I asked you a single question on the telephone last week," I said softly. My voice carried an eerie, unshakable calm that forced the surrounding politicians and investors to lean in and listen. "I will give you one final opportunity to answer it." Brenda stopped sobbing. She looked up, her breath hitching in her chest. A flicker of genuine terror crossed her features. "What was the name of my boarding school?" I asked. The ballroom fell into a profound, suffocating stillness. The catering staff stood motionless near the buffet tables. The bartender stopped polishing glasses. Everyone watched the weeping woman on the floor, waiting for her to redeem herself with a single piece of basic maternal knowledge. 10 seconds passed. Brenda opened her mouth, but her vocal cords refused to produce a sound. Her eyes darted around the VIP alcove, searching the faces of strangers for a lifeline that did not exist. 20 seconds elapsed. The silence became a physical weight pressing down on her shoulders. She squeezed her eyes shut, digging frantically through the shallow archives of her memory. She searched for a mascot, a town name, a teacher, anything to prove she cared. She found nothing. 30 seconds. Mayor Thorne shook his head, turning his gaze away from the pathetic display. He understood the gravity of her failure. A mother who loved her child would know the name of the institution where that child spent 3,600 days, 40 seconds. The agonizing passage of time served as an undeniable testament to her neglect. She had no idea where I spent a decade of my life. She never cared enough to memorize the name of my prison. The objective truth of her abandonment laid bare for the entire Alaskan elite to witness. "That is what I thought," I whispered, the words slicing through the quiet room with terminal finality. I stepped back, severing the emotional connection entirely. I turned my head toward the shadows near the back of the alcove. Marcus, my lead corporate attorney, stepped forward. He wore a sharp charcoal suit and carried a pristine manila envelope. He moved with the crisp, unyielding efficiency of a man delivering a finalized verdict. Marcus stopped directly in front of Trent. He extended his hand, pressing the thick envelope against Trent's chest until the coward was forced to take it. "What is this?" Trent stammered, holding the paper as if it were toxic. "That is your formal notice of expulsion," Marcus explained, projecting his voice for the official record. "When you signed the guest liability and wildlife hazard waiver this morning, you legally acknowledged your status as a transient short-term lodger. Clause 4 explicitly states that any fraudulent activity conducted on Aurora Estates property terminates the lodging agreement forthwith. Since your wife just committed felony wire fraud, your invitation is permanently revoked." Brenda scrambled to her feet, her face pale, her hands trembling as she smoothed her sequined dress. "You cannot evict us into the snow. It is freezing outside. We have tenant rights. We established residency." Marcus offered a thin, professional smile. "You surrendered your residential rights when you signed the commercial waiver. You are now classified as trespassers. You have exactly 1 hour to vacate the staff cabin. My security team has already packed your belongings. Your suitcases are currently sitting on the curb outside the main resort gate. If you remain on the premises past that deadline, you will incur a $500 penalty for every hour you overstay, and my client will authorize Sheriff Holden to arrest you for criminal trespassing." The legal checkmate was absolute. They held no leverage, no finances, and no shelter. They had traded their only advantage for the illusion of power, signing away their future without reading the fine print. Sheriff Holden tugged gently on the steel chain connecting Chloe's wrists. He guided the weeping woman toward the main exit of the ballroom. The crowd parted, creating a wide path for the officer and his prisoner. Chloe kept her head down, her metallic dress shimmering under the exit signs as she walked out into the freezing Alaskan night. I raised my hand, signaling my private security detail. The 2 towering guards stepped forward, placing their hands firmly on the shoulders of Brenda and Trent. They guided my remaining relatives away from the VIP section, marching them across the polished oak floorboards. Brenda tried to look back at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and disbelief, but the guards kept her moving forward toward the coat check. I watched the heavy glass doors swing shut behind them. They were gone. The threat to my physical sanctuary was neutralized. I turned back to the remaining guests, offering a polite smile, ready to resume the charity gala and celebrate the success of my enterprise. However, a predator backed into a corner rarely accepts defeat quietly. The immediate physical confrontation was over, but Brenda still possessed a smartphone. She harbored a desperate need for vindication and retained access to an entire network of extended relatives in Seattle who thrived on manufactured drama. As the string quartet resumed playing a lively symphony, my personal cell phone vibrated deep inside my clutch, signaling the beginning of a relentless digital siege. The morning light over the Chugach Mountains was brilliant and clear, contrasting sharply with the digital storm raging on my bedside table. I woke to the rhythmic vibration of my phone, rattling against the mahogany nightstand. I picked up the device and looked at the illuminated screen. 79 missed calls. 42 unread text messages. 14 voicemails. The notifications formed a solid, uninterrupted block of frantic, escalating panic. Brenda had wasted no time. Stripped of her local audience and escorted off my property, she turned to the only theater she had left to control. She activated the extended family network back in Seattle. She had spent the early morning hours spinning a hysterical, fabricated narrative to my aunts, uncles, and cousins. In her version of events, I was a tyrannical, wealth-obsessed monster who lured my vulnerable family to Alaska, trapped them in a freezing cabin, framed my innocent sister for a crime she did not commit, and threw my elderly mother out into the snow. I did not answer a single call. I carried the phone into my kitchen, poured a cup of dark roast coffee, and sat at the granite island. I opened the messaging application. The text followed a predictable, escalating pattern of manufactured outrage. Aunt Susan wrote first, demanding to know how I could abandon my flesh and blood in a strange state. Cousin Mark sent a lengthy paragraph calling me a disgrace corrupted by corporate greed. Another aunt left a tearful voicemail, begging me to drop the charges against Chloe, insisting that family disagreements should never involve law enforcement and jail cells. They were acting as flying monkeys, dispatched by a narcissist to harass the target into submission. They operated on incomplete information, driven by a misplaced sense of tribal loyalty and Brenda's weaponized tears. I did not feel angry. I did not feel the familiar childhood urge to defend myself, to call them back, or to set the record straight. Explaining yourself to individuals committed to misunderstanding you is a profound waste of energy. Instead, I employed a tactic I utilized in corporate risk management. I documented everything. I took a high-resolution screenshot of every accusatory text. I time-stamped every missed call and transcribed the voicemails. I organized the digital evidence into a secure, encrypted folder on my cloud server. Then, I switched the phone to silent mode and set it face down on the granite surface. I embraced the profound, untouchable peace of ghosting. The silence in my kitchen was not lonely. It was liberated. I walked into my study and approached the expansive glass windows overlooking the primary access road of Aurora Estates. The private snowplows had already cleared the asphalt, leaving high, white banks along the perimeter of the pine forest. A yellow local taxi navigated the winding curve toward the main resort exit. Through the clear glass, I watched the vehicle slow down near the security gate. My high-definition security feed on my desktop monitor confirmed the passengers. Brenda and Trent sat in the back seat. Their faces were pale, their posture defeated and tense. They were fleeing the battlefield. Chloe was currently sitting in a holding cell at the municipal county jail, awaiting her formal arraignment for felony wire fraud. She faced serious federal implications. A devoted mother and a loyal husband might have stayed. They might have hired a local defense attorney, secured a hotel room in town, and fought for her release. But Brenda and Trent were opportunists, and opportunists do not stick around when the ship starts taking on water. They had to secure their own escape. I knew the local airline tariffs well. Last-minute, same-day departures from Anchorage to Seattle cost a premium. Since I had deactivated the stolen expense card and evicted them from the property, they were forced to empty their own pockets. They were maxing out their personal credit limits just to retreat from the territory they had arrogantly chosen to invade. I watched the taxi pass through the iron gates, merging onto the public highway and disappearing into the dense tree line. The physical threat was officially gone. However, one lingering detail remained unresolved in my mind. It was the catalyst that initiated this entire ordeal, the initial phone call. Brenda had contacted me weeping, claiming her new husband, Frank, had abandoned her, emptied their bank accounts, and left her facing a 3-day eviction notice. She demanded exactly $3,000 to prevent imminent homelessness. The math had never aligned properly. People facing sudden eviction do not orchestrate elaborate Alaskan vacations. I decided to pull the final thread of her deception to see what unraveled. I sat at my desk and opened my secure laptop. Aurora Estates retained a premier corporate investigator on retainer. We utilized his services to run deep background checks on high-level vendors and potential executive hires. His name was David, and he possessed the ability to uncover public financial records with surgical speed. I sent David a brief, encrypted email. I provided Brenda's current Seattle address and the legal name of her husband, Frank. I asked him to verify the status of their residential tenancy and check for any recent civil filings, bankruptcy claims, or eviction notices in their county court system. I spent the next 2 hours reviewing architectural blueprints for a new wellness pavilion, letting the digital inquiry run its course. I felt a quiet certainty settling into my chest. When dealing with lifelong manipulators, the most dramatic tragedies are usually a smokescreen for mundane greed. At noon, a secure notification popped up on my screen. David had returned the intelligence report. I opened the attached document. The findings were stark, clear, and highly illuminating. There was no eviction notice filed at the county courthouse. The property management company managing Brenda's townhouse confirmed her rent was paid in full for the next 2 months. Furthermore, a quick scan of local municipal traffic cameras and utility registrations confirmed Frank had not left. His vehicle remained parked in their assigned driveway. He was currently renewing his local business license. The tragic tale of the abandoned, destitute wife was a total fabrication. But David had dug deeper into the financial footprint. He accessed a peripheral sweep of recent credit inquiries linked to Brenda's primary email address. He flagged a pending transaction that had stalled due to insufficient funds on her end. It was an invoice from a premier maritime travel agency. The booking was for a 14-day luxury Caribbean cruise scheduled to depart from Miami in early March. The itinerary featured a premium balcony suite, unlimited top-shelf beverage packages, and private VIP shore excursions in St. Bart's. I scrolled down to the bottom of the invoice. The required deposit to secure the reservation was exactly $3,000. I leaned back in my leather chair, letting the revelation wash over me. She had not called me in a moment of desperate panic. She had called me because she wanted to secure a tropical vacation, and she viewed my bank account as her personal travel fund. When I refused to play the role of the obedient, terrified daughter, she pivoted. She scammed my grandmother for the airline tickets, brought Chloe along to exploit my perceived weakness, and attempted to hijack my life to fund her leisure. Every tear, every plea, every accusation was a calculated component of a long con designed to extract luxury at my expense. It was time to dismantle her theater permanently. I opened my personal email client. I created a new message and populated the recipient field with the email addresses of every extended family member who had texted or called me that morning. Aunts, uncles, cousins, and distant relatives. I gathered the entire digital audience she had weaponized against me into one unblinded thread. I left the subject line blank. In the body of the email, I typed a single, concise sentence. Here is the truth you are looking for. I attached 3 specific files to the message. First, I attached the audio recording from the hidden USB drive, clearly documenting Brenda, Chloe, and Trent plotting to claim squatter privileges and steal corporate funds. Second, I attached the public booking record from the municipal county jail, detailing Chloe's felony charges for wire fraud and identity theft, complete with her booking photograph and the arresting officer's official statement. Third, I attached the intercepted travel agency invoice, highlighting the $3,000 luxury Caribbean cruise deposit under Brenda's name, exposing the foundational lie of her entire scheme. I did not add a lengthy explanation. I did not ask for their understanding or demand their apologies. The evidence spoke with a brutal, undeniable clarity that no amount of emotional manipulation could refute. I attached the files, reviewed the recipient list one final time, and pressed send. The email vanished into cyberspace, carrying the payload that would shatter Brenda's carefully constructed victim narrative across her entire social network. She would return to Seattle not as a tragic martyr, but as an exposed fraud, forced to explain the undeniable proof of her predatory behavior to everyone she knew. I closed the laptop screen. The digital siege was broken. The flying monkeys were silenced permanently. I walked back toward the expansive glass windows of my study, looking out over the pristine, snow-covered Alaskan landscape. The sun shone brightly against the mountain peaks, reflecting a brilliant, unyielding light. My territory was secure. The storm had passed, leaving nothing but clear skies and the quiet, solid truth of the empire I had built, preparing me for the ultimate realization of what it truly meant to be free. The fire crackled in the river stone hearth, casting a warm, golden glow across the vaulted timber ceiling of my living room. Outside, the Alaskan winter raged, burying the pine forest under fresh, heavy snow. The wind howled against the reinforced glass, but the cold could not penetrate the walls I had built. Inside, the air smelled of cedar wood, roasted wild salmon, and genuine comfort. I sat in my favorite leather armchair, holding a mug of spiced tea, watching the people gathered around my coffee table. Arthur sat near the fire, recounting a story from his early shipping days, a glass of neat bourbon resting in his hand. Sarah, my lead concierge, laughed at his punchline, sharing a plate of food with her husband. Mayor Thorne and off-duty Sheriff Holden stood by the kitchen island, debating local zoning regulations with a familiar, easy camaraderie. These were not my employees or business associates. They were my chosen tribe. They were the individuals who recognized my worth, supported my vision, and stood beside me when the shadows grew long. I looked at them and felt a profound sense of clarity. For 23 years, I carried an invisible weight. I dragged the heavy expectation of biological loyalty across every milestone of my life. I harbored a quiet, desperate hope that one day my mother would look at me with pride. I waited for a sisterly bond that only existed in fiction. I poured my emotional energy into a bottomless well, hoping to draw water from dry earth. Sitting by the fire, I finally understood the fundamental truth about kinship. Sharing DNA is merely an accident of biology. It does not generate automatic loyalty, and it certainly does not grant anyone a free pass to exploit your hard work. Family is not defined by birth certificates or shared last names. Family is defined by consistent action. Family is the group of people who show up when the storm hits, who respect your sanctuary, and who celebrate your victories without demanding a cut of the profits. My biological relatives proved they were incapable of such actions. Their absence from my life was no longer a tragic loss. It was a vital layer of protection. Once I stopped grieving the family I wished I had, I found the freedom to embrace the family I had actually earned. Actions carry inescapable consequences. The universe has a precise way of balancing the scales when you stop intervening to protect predators from their own choices. News from the lower 48 trickled back to me through reliable channels over the following months, detailing the collapse of the fraudulent empire my mother tried to sustain. Chloe remains in the municipal county jail for 3 grueling days. Without Brenda there to instantly post bail or hire a premium defense attorney, Chloe experienced the stark, unforgiving reality of the justice system. A public defender eventually arranged her release, but her ordeal was far from over. She currently navigates the complex federal courts, facing multiple counts of wire fraud and identity theft. The legal fees are draining every cent she possesses. The pristine, consequence-free bubble Brenda spent decades inflating had burst permanently. Chloe will carry a felony record for the rest of her life, a heavy anchor attached to her professional and social reputation. Trent behaved exactly as a coward does when the illusions shatter. He did not stay in Alaska to support his wife through her arraignment. He secured the first available flight back to Washington State, prioritizing his own escape over his marriage vows. His instinct to flee offered him no permanent sanctuary. Word reached me that he lost his remote sales position due to his erratic behavior and unexcused absences. Without Chloe's mother to subsidize their lifestyle, Trent fell far behind on his financial obligations. He is currently facing formal eviction proceedings from his Seattle apartment. The tragic destiny they gleefully plotted to force upon me became their own inescapable reality. Brenda suffered the most poetic, devastating downfall of all. The local Alaskan prosecutor did not view her theatrical emergency call as a harmless mistake. They formally charged her for filing a false police report, forcing her to pay hefty municipal fines. However, her true punishment occurred within her own social circle. The email I dispatched containing her cruise invoice, the audio recordings, and Chloe's arrest records acted as a localized earthquake. Narcissists require a compliant audience to survive. My email shattered the curtain on her stage. The extended relatives who previously bombarded my phone with outraged messages fell silent. Confronted with undeniable, time-stamped proof of her predation, her flying monkeys scattered. Her siblings refused to loan her money for legal fees. The travel agency canceled the luxury Caribbean cruise due to a frozen bank account, keeping the non-refundable deposit. Brenda now sits in a quiet, lonely townhouse, entirely isolated by her own deception. She has no victims left to drain and no audience left to manipulate. Meanwhile, the ecosystem I cultivated continues to thrive. The winter season closed with record-breaking profit margins for Aurora Estates. We recently broke ground on the new wellness pavilion, expanding our footprint while maintaining our commitment to environmental preservation. My staff received generous quarterly bonuses, and the local conservation fund met its annual goal 3 months early. My empire flourishes because it is rooted in tangible reality, built on a foundation of integrity and mutual respect, rather than coercion and deceit. The contrast between our lives is not a matter of luck. It is the direct result of the choices we made. They chose to extract. I chose to build. They relied on deception. I relied on discipline. I want to speak directly to you now. If you are listening to my story, you might recognize the heavy, suffocating burden of toxic obligations. You might have a parent who demands your time, your money, and your emotional labor, while offering nothing but criticism in return. You might have siblings who view your success as a resource they are entitled to consume. You might lie awake at night, feeling an overwhelming, crushing guilt for simply wanting peace. Society conditions us to forgive endlessly. We are taught to endure disrespect in the name of familial duty. We are told to keep the peace, to turn the other cheek, to accept mistreatment because blood is supposedly thicker than water. Let me tell you a fundamental truth I learned in the frozen north. Setting boundaries is not an act of cruelty. It is an act of survival. You are not required to endure abuse to prove your loyalty. You are not obligated to finance the poor decisions of adults who refuse to take accountability for their own lives. You do not owe your abusers a seat at the table you built from scratch. True empowerment comes from recognizing your own inherent worth and refusing to let predators discount it. You must protect your sanctuary. You must remember that you are never required to set yourself on fire just to keep someone else warm. I faced the ghosts of my past and refused to let them haunt my future. I held my ground, spoke the truth, and watched the illusions crumble. The peace I feel tonight, looking at the fire and listening to the laughter of my true friends, is worth every difficult decision I had to make. Have you ever had to enforce an unbreakable boundary with a toxic parent or a manipulative relative? Did you face the guilt, hold your ground, and walk away to protect your own peace? How did it change your life once the storm passed? Drop your story in the comments below. I read every single one, and I know your courage will inspire someone else who is currently fighting that exact same battle. Thank you for listening to my journey. Protect your space, build your empire, and never apologize for choosing yourself. There is a haunting, lingering resonance in the image of an empty chair. In the landscape of American culture, where high school graduations are celebrated as profound rites of passage, filled with cheering families, flashing cameras, and bouquets of flowers, an empty seat in the audience is not just a physical void. It is a profound emotional betrayal. The story of Almira Johnson serves as a profound moral mirror for modern society, illustrating the devastating consequences of toxic parenting and the transformative power of self-cultivation. It is a narrative that forces us to look deeply at the foundations of our own homes, asking us to evaluate the true meaning of family responsibility, the heavy burden of traditional roles, and the long-term spiritual guidance we owe to the next generation. At the very heart of this reflection lies the social reality of our time, the poison of entitlement. In many contemporary circles, there is a growing crisis of materialistic entitlement that erodes the foundational bond between parent and child. Within a traditional family structure, a parent's fundamental duty is to provide not just shelter, but a moral compass, a steady hand to guide a child through the turbulent waters of life. Brenda, Almira's mother, embodies a spiritual bankruptcy where a child is treated as a disposable burden when inconvenient, and an ATM when money is needed. This disposable approach to family, abandoning a child for 10 years with 0 visits or phone calls, is a grave violation of moral duty. It shatters the sacred covenants of parenthood. Furthermore, this dynamic exposes the dark underbelly of the golden child syndrome seen in Chloe, illustrating how shielding a child from accountability creates an entitled adult who resorts to criminality and fraud when faced with reality. When parents conflate love with an absence of boundaries, they do not protect their children. They ruin them. They raise adults who believe the world owes them endless comfort. Parents must realize that raising a child without a moral compass or a sense of work leads to a path of inevitable self-destruction. True fairness in parenting means allowing children to face the consequences of their actions, teaching them that their worth is forged in character, not in the blind, unearned inheritance of a mother's endless excuses. To navigate such fractured family dynamics, one must cultivate profound emotional awareness and discernment. A spiritual path requires wisdom to see through the illusions of emotional manipulation. In American society, there is a heavy cultural expectation to blindly honor one's parents, often weaponized by toxic family members to extract unearned loyalty. Brenda tried to weaponize family values to guilt-trip Elmira into paying $3,000 for a luxury cruise under the guise of an eviction crisis. But wisdom allows an individual to distinguish between a genuine need and a deceptive trap. Elmira's icy and calculated response was not an act of cruelty, but one of spiritual discernment. She used logic, legal frameworks, and undeniable time-stamped proof to protect her peace. For parents and children alike, this kind of wisdom means understanding that a true family is built on presence and support, not just biological ties. It requires the emotional intelligence to recognize that you cannot heal a wound by continuously handing a knife to the person who cut you. This leads us to the indispensable value of morality and integrity over deceit. The stark contrast between Elmira's self-made success and her family's parasitism highlights the importance of morality. While Brenda and Chloe engaged in felony wire fraud and identity theft to fund a lifestyle they didn't earn, Elmira built an empire through academic scholarships and sheer grit. Her story is a testament to the quiet, unyielding power of the American dream when it is pursued with honest hands. From a practitioner's view, integrity is the ultimate protection. Elmira's ability to remain calm while her family screamed for unearned wealth demonstrates the strength that comes from a clean conscience. We must teach the next generation that wealth without character is a cage, leading only to public shame and legal ruin. Honesty is not just a moral ideal. It is the strongest armor one can wear in a world that often rewards deception. In the face of abandonment, one must also cultivate fierce resilience. Left at a boarding school at age 8 and graduating to an empty chair, Elmira did not allow bitterness to consume her. Instead, she used her solitude to build Aurora Estates, an ecotourism empire. In a spiritual sense, she practiced internal alchemy, turning the lead of abandonment into the gold of self-reliance. Resilience is the unbreakable boundary that allows a person to say no to toxic influences without setting themselves on fire to keep others warm. It is the profound realization that walking away from toxicity is not a failure of love, but a triumph of self-respect. Ultimately, the universe possesses an elegant, if ruthless, mechanism for balance. The conclusion of this story reinforces the timeless truth that actions have inevitable results. Brenda's attempt to weaponize 911 for a false report became the very catalyst for her downfall. The 40-second silence that occurred during their final confrontation was a poetic reflection of the decade of silence Brenda imposed on her daughter. This serves as a chilling warning to parents across all walks of life. The seeds of neglect and manipulation you plant today will eventually bear the fruit of alienation and accountability. You cannot sow deceit and expect to harvest devotion. To have a good life, one must move beyond the superficial and focus on self-correction. True empowerment does not come from exploiting others or demanding respect you haven't earned through love. It comes from building a community of choice, honoring your responsibilities, and raising children with the wisdom to be independent and the morality to be kind. Setting boundaries is not an act of hate. It is an act of survival and self-respect that allows one to live in unbothered peace. If this narrative of resilience, boundaries, and the quiet triumph of truth resonated with the echoes of your own life, I invite you to subscribe to the channel Luck, Revenge, Start. Here, we continue to explore the intricate, often painful, but ultimately empowering journeys of individuals who reclaim their peace from the ashes of betrayal. As you step away from this story, look closely at the invisible threads connecting your own family. Are they woven with mutual respect, honest guidance, and unconditional support? Or are they tethered by obligation, silent resentments, and debts that can never truly be repaid? We often believe that blood binds us together in a way that time and distance cannot break. But perhaps, in the quiet moments of the night, when the noise of the world fades away, we must ask ourselves a harder question. If all the titles of mother, father, or sister were stripped away, would the people in your life still be standing beside your chair? Or would you find yourself looking out at an empty room? The answer to that question is not just a reflection of them. It is a mirror reflecting the very life you have chosen to accept.